writing on the wall in my letters on my feet. I got to do something.
No.
So,
They don't like to do that.
that's right. Yeah, this certainly won't help our situation.
Yeah.
Good to see you, pal.
You too, man.
No, it'll just be a short story.
You're welcome.
Great. Okay. Okay, we'll get the meeting started. We'll start off with council meeting follow-up. Do we have anything from last week, Mr. City Manager?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I don't think I have anything to follow up with tonight.
Okay, anybody else have anything from last week? Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Where do we stand on a resolution to rename Conwell Park like former Councilman Laird had suggested? I'd kind of like to get something done on that before the end of the year.
Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Huber. We do plan to bring something forward to, I almost said tomorrow, next week, the next meeting, which would be the last meeting of the year incidentally, and it'll be in the form of a resolution for you to consider. And we thought we might address some of the questions as well on the history of the park and so forth in pre-meeting as well.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, and will we kind of be able to sort of fine tune any language or anything?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Positively. You bet.
Great, thank
You
you.
bet. Absolutely.
Okay, anything else from anybody? Okay, we will move on to the Nolan status update. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We are fortunate tonight to be able to hear about the project as it relates to the old Nolan properties. As you all know, we've got a partnership now with respect to True Land and Realty. And in that regard, we have representatives this evening from the same that will kind of fill us in as to what's going on and how it's going and what their timeframes look like and everything else. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could defer the floor to our partners' representatives, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Good evening, Mayor Friel, Vice Mayor Lutz, and members of the City Council. My name is Martin Axland, and I'm the Real Estate and Property Director for True Land and Realty. I've also brought with me tonight John Blumstrom, a member of our design team and legal counsel for True Land and Realty, and I've also brought Lyle Murtha, our architect and owner of State Line 7. Before I get started, though, does everyone have a copy of our renderings that would need one? Okay. So, as developers of the Nolan, we're happy to be here tonight to give you an update on our progress and answer any questions you may have about the future of the project. As we wrote in a recent letter to the council, our goal is to make the Nolan a hub for downtown Casper, where people can live, work, and play. When completed, the Nolan will consist of residential townhomes that include 2-car garages, rooftop terraces. The Nolan will also boast space for retail shops and restaurants that will bring people into downtown Casper. As you'll see in the renderings that we provided, our intent is to preserve more of the historical elements than what we previously planned, including what is now the entire southern building, mosaic floors, and murals painted nearly 100 years ago. Currently, we're in the final stages of site preparation and are planning to begin construction in spring of 2021. We expect construction to last 12 to 18 months. As previously stated, our project will continue to align with the 3 primary goals of the old Yellowstone District. The Nolan will enhance both the endless character and historic preservation goals by preserving as much of the historic property as possible. Our project will also satisfy the vibrant urban center goal with a healthy mix of residential and commercial uses. The investment required to bring the Nolan to life is significant. True Land and Realty estimates the entire project will require a capital investment of approximately $8.6 million. As we continue to move forward with this project, we would like to thank you for your patience and express our gratitude for your thoughtful input as we've worked through the design development process. We also want to thank the city for your work to make projects like this possible. We are proud of the Nolan and its ability to return a relic of Casper's past into a vibrant and productive part of our community's future. Lastly, I want to assure you that we will keep you informed of our progress as we move forward with the various stages of construction and as we work through our way to completion, as this is a vital project to Casper and our downtown. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Councilman McCarthy.
I'd already mentioned it earlier. I would like to see the architect change the rendering there. Instead of putting Ford Motor Company on there, it should be Chevrolet.
Yep.
Since that was the old Chevrolet property. So just something to throw out.
Got it.
Councilman Bates.
I don't know if you can fully answer this, but just out of curiosity, how much money is going into developing this? How much are you guys putting into it?
Right now, the estimated investment is $8.6 million.
$8.6 million. Thank you.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to compliment you guys. I look at this plan and it's more attuned to what we've been trying to work toward in OYD, because this can be a property that can be owned by younger folks and maybe some of us older folks. And one of the major concepts behind OYD was to build properties down there that would make it a community. And so I just wanted to thank you guys for, this is a good plan. I appreciate it.
We appreciate the partnership.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you guys have a guess, or it might be in here somewhere, about what the cost is of these residential units?
You know, we just finished the design development phase, and we're just beginning the process of construction documents, so we just don't have any estimates at this point yet. We're just not that far into the process.
Oh, one more quick one.
Councilman Hopkins.
Can I put my gardens on the top of the roof? Will it be structurally capable of taking raised gardens?
It would be, to Lyle's pleasure, I think. Yes.
Just kidding.
Anybody else? Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have so much a question, but I do have a comment on this. You know, people around town love to go back and second guess. Well, you know, the city put so much money into that down there and blah, blah, blah and all that. That is all water under the bridge. Those were decisions that were made years ago. They were made by well-intentioned members of the council and city staff with the best of intentions and the best of information that was available at that time. The critical thing now is to see that turn into a valuable asset downtown. And I think that that's the direction that this is going. And so I would just say to the naysayers that sit there and say, well, you know, there was all this money thrown away years ago. Whether if it was or it wasn't, you know, that's already water that's downstream under the bridge. Let's look forward and let's see and make this be something good that's an asset to the whole community. And I just want to say that, you know, to everybody that might be listening. You know, you can go back and second guess decisions from years ago, all that you want to, but let's move forward. And this looks to me like a good forward-moving, forward-thinking project.
Councilman Cathy.
One other quick thing is I would like to give True Development an attaboy. If you all have watched the development at the corner of 15th and Outer Drive there on the northeast corner where the new Hilltop Bank is, that whole development was put together by these folks here, and that's quite a nice addition to that corner. They have done it well, and I've driven by there darn near every day and watched it go up, and they have tried to keep the streets clean, tried to take care of traffic, so I would definitely give them an attaboy as far as their development capabilities. So, thank you very much. You bet. So.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Do we have anything else on that, Mr. City Manager? Okay, then we'll move forward to the Downtown Development Authority update. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We're pleased tonight to have representatives of the DDA here with us this evening. Members of the board and their executive director are here and have some reports to provide as to how things are going over there and ultimately a request that they'd like to make as well. And so if I could defer the floor to Mr. Hawley, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, Mr. Hawley.
Members of City Council, City Manager, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. Am I supposed to leave this on? I'm sorry.
You can take it on.
Okay. It's going to be kind of long, so it'll be a little easier to flap my gums like this. Kevin Hawley, Executive Director, Downtown Development Authority, address 341 West Yellowstone Highway 82601. Was asked to provide 2 updates today, and God bless our City Manager and his probable frustration with me learning that burying your head in the sand and trying to ignore a problem is no solution. So a year later, here we are, and thank you for your patience, City Manager, City staff. First thing on the docket is an update on David Street Station and a potential 501c3 filing and the implications to the city and what that might look like. I don't know that everyone's familiar with it. But we do have a contract not only for the facility to lease it back from the city, but also to operate it. In that, it outlines the structure of the Casper DDA, our roles, responsibilities of the city, and such, as well as agreements with the Wyoming Business Council, the state, Ash Street lease. It's quite complicated. In that, if we were to change David Street Station to a 501c3, it would disrupt, or we would be in breach of that contract. Rather than rewrite all of the contracts, one of the things we're looking at David Street Station is to file for a foundation. So it would not change the DDA overseeing David Street Station. It wouldn't change any of our contracts. All this would be a fundraising arm for David Street Station that would not be tied to state statute and city ordinance as it pertains to the DDA. That gives us an advantage to recruit more board members that are not tied to the 50% rule from within our downtown district. It allows us maybe to go to the east side, the west side, you know, a mom that lives on the west side, or someone of that nature that maybe may not have a role in downtown with the DDA. And I bring that up only because the operating cost of David Street Station annually is roughly about $800,000. Of that, the DDA, we rely solely on a mill levy for our operations. That mill levy results in $150,000. So you've got pretty cute little DDA over here that does operations on $150,000 from property owners that vote every year to tax themselves above and beyond their normal property taxes. And then you have this, for us, this beast of David Street Station at $800,000, 100% privately funded through our fundraising efforts, operational revenue that we can muster up. So it really puts the, I don't want to say the burden, but there's this shift of focus when we're so worried about how are we going to pay for David Street, how are we going to pay for David Street. We really need a fundraising arm. And I don't want to go back 7 years ago. We had this conversation. It was different administration, city councils, city managers, city attorneys. But really, as a governmental entity, as long as we do fundraising and gather funds and it's used for the public good, it's tax exempt just like a 501c3. So that's what we currently do now. You get your same letter in the mail. Everything's kosher with the IRS. The difference is right now, as we get into it on the next item, we really need to have a foundation, much like some of the bigger nonprofits in this town, of $5 or $6 million and an endowment that gives some very stable operating revenue to David Street Station. So every year it's not, you know, how are we going to pay for tomorrow? How are we going to pay for tomorrow? So that's really it. I don't want to concern anyone that we're changing, well, maybe later we're going to be changing some contracts, I don't know. But as of now, David Street Station will still be under the management and care of the Downtown Development Authority. It would not impact any of our contracts for operations. This simply would be a private citizen saying, you know what, I want to go raise money for the good of the community, and I can start a foundation. And that's not to say, you know, I'm sticking my nose at city council, but anyone in this audience could go create a foundation if for a public good to raise money for David Street Station. I finally just got to a point of frustration where we're getting ready to file the paperwork, because if this thing's gonna do what we propose it to do for generations to come, we've got to figure out our financials and can't just keep praying for miracles. So I'd entertain any questions on the creation of a 501c3 foundation. If not, I would go to the second item, which is 135 North Ash.
Anybody have any questions? Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kevin, I support you doing this. This is, you need a foundation to do what you're going to do. You don't want to change the DDA in terms of structurally what they are. That does not make sense. But the bottom line is you need a funding source, and to have a David Street Station foundation as a 501c3, that is the ultimate short-term solution, in my opinion. Thank you.
And Councilman, if I could, not just short term, but that's where we want to grow that $5 or $6 million. And again, that's not the DDA staff or David Street Station staff that needs to be planning and focusing on operations. This is a private arm that says, you know what, every year we want to raise $500,000, and then we distribute it, whether it's quarterly, annually. This is going to become the fundraising arm for David Street Station.
Bingo.
Councilman Cathy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know when this was originally proposed to council, there was, at the time of that initial fundraising, excuse me, it was actually stated in the presentation to council that you were actually going to raise that money for that foundation type money back in the initial fundraising effort. Did that never occur, or was that cut short, or did the construction costs overrun, or what happened at that point when we were told that this would be a self-funding because of that money that was initially going to be raised.
Great question, and I can address it. Hopefully, I don't get too long-winded. We did create out of a capital, the capital construction, an endowment, and Doris McMurray was probably the second donor when the plans were just drawn that came in and said, I'll support, I know you're going to raise this, Brian Scott. What I want to make sure is that in 30 years, this thing's still fulfilling its mission. She contributed $1 million that we invested with the Wyoming Community Foundation that leverages $40,000 annually to supplement operations of David Street Station. So that's still in play, but I can gobble through $40,000 in one event. So long-term is we want to add to that endowment. Just today received a $7,500 invoice from a contractor that was doing annual maintenance and repairs there. So that's great now while we're taking care of 3-year-old boilers. My concern is what happens in 10 years when $150,000 roof or system goes out. How do I pay for that? That endowment, we cannot touch. We only touch the 4% interest. Anything above the 4% goes into the corpus.
No, I was under the impression when Brian and Mick sat there in that meeting that there was going to be about $5 million raised into that endowment, and that was really the question that I was asking.
Oh,
because they were talking in terms of, you know, someplace between about 13 and 16 million dollars they were going to raise, and of that, a portion of that, like I said, in the range of 5 million was going to go into that endowment, and Mick's contribution as seed money for that was that $1 million.
To answer your question, Councilman, I don't recall, that's not to say it didn't happen. I don't ever recall a, $13 to $15 million project. If anything, it was supposed to be about a $7 to $8 million project, and then cost overrun turned into a $10+ million project. Well, I don't even want to go there, but you can plan all you want, and then you learn you think you're qualifying for a $3 million grant and you only get $1 million, and that changes everything. But pretty proud of that investment still. $4 million in a public project came from the public in the form of $3 million from the community and 1 cent, and $1 million from the Wyoming Business Council, and over $6 million in private investment in the capital construction, and then to date, since over $500,000 a year in private fundraising to operate this thing. So.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kevin, I wonder if it might be helpful for council, I know we need to move on to S Street, but it might be good for them to know the burden of insurance that you folks have had to take on, or will have to take on without the coverage from WARM that you are eligible for as a governmental entity, to help them understand the demands that the 503C, I always get that mixed up, the nonprofit would have to take on as far as insuring the events.
Correct. Council members, when we first started this, I actually filed the paperwork to create a 501c3 to build, David Street Station 501c3. And it was then when the attorneys got together, both city and our private representative, and they said, why are you guys doing this? Like, you have the same tax advantages. If anything, you've got more advantages remaining a governmental unit. And one of those was teaming up with the city to apply for Wyoming Association of Risk Management, the WARM pool. And they have some minimums, so that's what we did. And that saved us in talking to all of our model communities, specifically Rapid City. They spend almost $40,000 a year on general liability. Through WARM, we were able to secure that insurance for just over $5,000 a year. Long story short, we've since been booted off WARM. I think either we don't qualify or we're deemed too much of a risk. We've had to find private insurance, and it was after being rejected from about 20 some insurance agencies, finally found one, and it runs us about $35,000 a year. So on top of that, taking a substantial, going from about $7,000 a year in liability insurance to 35 was kind of a kick in the teeth.
Any other questions? Councilman Bates.
The idea of not doing the 501(c)(3) to do the fundraising that you want to is and I don't know enough about it, so, or know anything really about it, so I apologize for my ignorance on it. I just want to make sure that, allowing you, if council says, yeah, that's great, go with it. Has that been approved by council before for others or denied? And I know you don't want to look at history too much, but I just want to make sure. And then is it, with our contract, double checking, there is absolutely no way that violate the contract between the city and with David Street.
Councilman Bates, just to make sure I want to make sure I understand and accurately answer your question. I'm certainly not an attorney. I don't believe it would violate any contract with the city because my intent is not to touch any contract as it pertains to the operation and oversight and maintenance of David Street Station. Anyone in this room could create a 501c3 tomorrow if the IRS approved it. If I wanted to go save puppies tomorrow, I could file a 501c3. All I'm doing, I ask you for the foundation to look at this not as the DDA, but Kevin Hawley, a private citizen, Ward 2, cares about David Street Station, the well-being of the community. He wants to create a band of other people that care about it and go raise money and do annual or quarterly disbursements to David Street Station DDA. Does that make sense? Okay. So for tonight's purposes, I certainly can, didn't intend to ask for permission to create that foundation because I don't think it would change anything. But if there was a conversation that the city wanted to lead, that you would like to see us change, we would certainly entertain that.
Thank you.
Councilman Hopkins.
If I may, perhaps just a point of clarification, a 501c3 can raise money through a foundation. We have foundations for the library, we have foundations for the hospital, we have foundations for the trails, but that's still independent of what Davis Street Station is being operated by under their tax provisions. So those two have to remain, in my opinion, and John, I probably need to depend on you, those two things have to remain kind of separated because you can have, as he mentioned, you can have a 501c3, which is nothing but a nonprofit corporation to raise funds. But you don't want to be mixing those funds with tax funds that are generated by property taxes. That would be a bad move, in my opinion. So, thank you.
Did you have anything to add, Mr. Henley?
You know, I don't, Mr. Mayor, I think that Councilman Hopkins is right on point, I think.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, this is going to get rather complicated, trying to explain it to the auditors this week, and I can see why. I understand it, but I've been doing this for 7 years and been through the trenches. So what we're going to talk about now is a 5-year commitment by the DDA in order to purchase the state office building that was located at 226 South David. Some of you may know that as the old Ray's Taxidermy. That was step number 1 in order to build David Street Station. We went down to the governor's office, had a meeting with him, and he said, why in the world would we sell our nicest building in Casper so you guys could knock it down? I said, well, we have this crazy vision. He said, okay, great, I get it, but if you want to basically demolish our building, you need to move my state employees for the unemployment call center for the entire state. You need to move them somewhere at no cost to the state. So we'll sell you the building, but we're not going to go have $500,000 in expense in rent and moving and all of these things. So we said, okay, great. And the original term was 3 years. DDA was going to cover all of that on top of the purchase price within our capital campaign and fundraising. And then things went kind of south with the oil and gas industry, the consolidated state office building that you see now by Karen and Jim's, the office, was kind of, well, what if that doesn't happen and we just sold this building? So we're at the final decision day before the Wyoming Business Council and the State Building Commission, and the governor said, you know what, we're going to protect our backside. We want to add an option for 2 more years. And that's not to lay any blame on anyone. If I were them, I would certainly do it as well. People say, well, God, why'd you guys take that terrible deal? I mean, you guys are idiots. You can't negotiate a contract. Well, the truth of the matter is when you need someone a heck of a lot more than they need you you don't have much leverage. So we're standing in front of the 5 electeds, and they said, this is what it's going to take. And we said, well, I guess we'll take that deal, hoping please have this state office building finished before 5 years so we can save some of that money. Actively, when we are fundraising, we get a $1,000 donation, we get a $10,000 donation, we get a $100 donation. That doesn't just go to David Street Station, it goes to fulfill the commitments that we made in order to get to David Street Station where we are today, and that includes the lease on Ash Street. So I want to make it clear that just about no one in this room, including city manager, city attorney, and DDA board members, were part of these discussions. So it's not to lay blame or point fingers. I just wanted to make that clear. City manager has been great to work with and kind of walking through these things that frankly they've inherited. So going back to that, at the time, I don't know if it's still true, 135 North Ash was occupied by Lenhart Mason. They were looking to sell the building. City had a policy to look at and potentially purchase properties adjacent to City Hall, understanding the city's not going anywhere. Then City Manager Patterson approached us and said, hey, you guys were looking at the private sector, why don't you look at this building over here? We're going to buy it. We don't really have a use for it. You can move the state in there. We were negotiating terms with the private sector at the time. Looking back at it, I wish I wouldn't have said what I said, but he said, well, what are you going to pay that guy over there? And we said, $115 a year or whatever it was. So long story short, the city came back and said, well, we've got the space. Why don't you just pay us $115 a year? Well, the difference, if you know anything about real estate, was a full service lease compared to triple net. So right now, we have paid the city, I think it's about 3.5 years and it fluctuates from $116,000 to $118,000 a year, plus all carrying costs, which include utilities and minor maintenance under $1,000 per occurrence. That runs roughly about $35,000 a year. I don't know if I need to go through all of these things. Long story short, we have a balance of about just under $150,000 that we owe the city. It's in the contract. It should be part of your packet. If not, I'm happy to send it to you or have a discussion about it. Long story short is David Street Station does not have the financial means to write that check to fulfill the 5th year of the state office building lease for the state office. Just for clarification, if it matters, about 10 minutes before coming over here, I just looked at our bank account. DDA checking account, the mill levy has $14,100. That fluctuates as those mill levy funds come in. But David Street Station operating, which is segregated, has $108,900 in our checking account. So I could write you a check for $108,900, and I would be dropping off the keys to the DDA and David Street Station tomorrow saying, and this isn't I guess I shouldn't say this like it's a threat or ultimatum, it's just the reality of the situation. We would be in no position to operate David Street Station, and then the city would have to figure out something. So my request today is essentially, we're already in breach of contract because we have not paid that. The reality of our financial situation is we are going to default. My request today is to please consider amending the contract to forgive that 5th and final year. Actually, it's about the 4.5 and 5. If you'd forgive that $140,000 and some change that we owe on the lease, I can continue to make monthly installments to carry the cost of utilities and minor maintenance to fulfill the contractual term, which is January 2022, about 1 year from now. And then I also threw it in, I don't know if it's peanuts to you guys, if not, I'll certainly take it back, but you were gracious enough to award us just over $14,000, I believe, in 1 cent funds. A lot of people have asked me, why haven't you collected on that? I said, well, I feel kind of dirty taking money from the city when I owe them $150,000, so we would forfeit any right to that to offset any of the proceeds that you're not going to see from this. So what I'd like to ask is that this maybe remain revenue neutral. You don't take in any new monies from the DDA, but we make sure that we continue to cover any operating expenses over there. I have talked with city manager about honestly what a great investment this was. I think anybody in the private sector would have bought that building for $1 million if they could turn around and have no carrying costs, $300,000 improvement in tenant improvements. And then, excuse me, I don't have the numbers right offhand, but a significant amount, $423,000 in rent. Again, I do understand, so certainly I'm not happy to be here or proud to essentially say we're going to default on an agreement that we signed, but I would ask that you take into consideration all of the efforts we made, the risks we took to get where we are now, and if we didn't, frankly, and we waited on the state, we'd be waiting to build David Street Station for another year. When they finish that state office building, then we'd need 3 years of construction. I mean, we'd be 8 years behind where we are. What you see not only in David Street Station, the quality of life enhancement for the community, the pride of the community, but also the economic engine that it is. Please ask you to take that into consideration and consider amending the agreement to allow us to continue to fulfill our mission for the community. With that, I'll answer any questions.
Vice Mayor Luz.
All right, so they're black and white accounting questions, just, that's how my brain processes this, and so I apologize because these might be a little hard to answer on the spot. So obviously, at the beginning, you guys very likely had a business plan basically saying, you know, here's how much we'll bring in, here's how much we'll spend, like this is how we cash flow this, like this is how we get people to invest, like this is the plan. So I mean, ultimately to me, what that tells me is something must have changed. Because I mean, obviously, nobody would have moved forward with this if the intention was, hey, you know, a couple years in, it's not going to look so hot. So what happened there? Is it maybe a difference in expected revenue, or were there maybe like significant, I mean, it'd have to be significantly higher than projected expenses? Do you just have, I'm sorry that it's off on the spot, but.
I get a little long-winded because I live and breathe downtown, so I get kind of excited, and I'll tell you every little nuance you want to know on this project. The original budget, is Lyle still here? He might kick me. So the original budget, when we did this thing, we had penciled $3 million from the Wyoming Business Council in a community readiness grant. Then we went a year into this after the city pledged the $3 million of 1 cent, and they said, sorry, you don't qualify for that. You qualify for a community enhancement grant. And I think at the time they didn't understand it, the Wyoming Business Council, because when we went for our final grant, some 3 years later, for our final $500,000 of that $1 million, they said, why didn't you guys apply for the $3 million grant? We said, life would have been a heck of a lot easier if we could have gotten that. So in addition to that, right off the bat, we had a $2 million uphill climb that we had to make up in the private sector. On top of that, God bless him, Lyle came and said, Kevin, what's your construction budget? Our construction budget was $5 million. Well, I wasn't going to tell the architect we had $5 million to spend, because then he'd spend $5 million and we get a bill for $6 million. So I fibbed and told him $4 million. Well, we got our bids back and it was $6 million. So on top of the $2 million that we just had to claw to raise in the private sector, then we saw the design and we said, okay, we'll stretch it to your, it was a $5 million design he had. We said, we'll stretch it for the $1 million because it's just so good. The community's going to love it. Then we got bids back and bids came in $1 million more than the estimate. So long story short, that's it. This year has been unbelievably difficult. Not to cry me a river or anything, but we, in our role as a governmental entity, we did not qualify for PPP or any COVID relief from the Wyoming Business Council. And a lot of people say, well, how is that? You know, the city got $3.5 million or Cheyenne got whatever. The way we read it, and trust me, I've talked to Barrasso, to the governor, to Wyoming Business Council. I've been on a mission for the last 5 months. The way we operate, because David Street Station is so goofy, I called let's see if I can, without babbling too long. When you guys create your budget, you have to do amendments if you're going to spend more or less or whatever. So when we called the state and said, how do you want us to submit this budget? Because we're on like projections like a nonprofit. So in a best case scenario, if we do everything we want to do for David Street Station, it's going to be $800,000. But if we only raise $500,000, we're cutting a bunch of concerts, farmers market, and we're just doing what we cash flow. And they said, well, you got to put in what you're likely to spend. And I said, so in a worst case scenario? They said, yeah. I said, okay, well then I'll put $800,000 plus the $150. And they said, okay, great. So our problem now is we go to apply for one of those things and they said, no, it's outside of that's not outside of your budget. You said you were going to spend that. So I don't know if you guys are tracking that, but they basically said, you said you were going to spend $50,000 on this. We can't give you any. I could probably roll the dice and do something unethical, but if we get audited in a year or two and somebody comes poking around and say, you owe us $200,000, you can already see we can't pay you, so we certainly can't pay the government back either. Yeah, I don't know if that addressed your, COVID crushed us this year. We've bled over $150,000 just trying to wait. For us, looking back on it, what I should have done, and I don't say this lightly, but I should have laid off our entire staff, including myself, when this was coming. It was like, oh, 2 weeks, oh, 2 more weeks. They're not going to shut us down forever. 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks, can't do outdoor events. Well, we had to have our staff ready to go because in 2 weeks, we're coming in the summer. That's our busy season. But, you know, trying to carry out a savings, $100,000 in payroll to survive, that's really what has put us in this kind of financial bind. And donors are down, endowments are down, giving's down. So 2020 can't end soon enough, but I think preaching to the choir on that.
Oh, yeah, no, we understand that. One more follow-up question. So obviously, once again, these are just accounting questions, because I guess to me, this is a very accounting-related problem. So regardless of what happens with this 150, I think the question then becomes, if the 150 is causing that much of a problem, you're one step away from it being something else causing the problem, as far as, you know, being in this sinking situation. And so I think the question that I would have just purely from an accounting standpoint is, even assuming that this problem were to go away, what is going to change so that the next problem doesn't land you in the exact same situation? Because, I mean, when we're really thinking about it, $150,000 isn't that much money. Obviously, to Kristen Lutz or to you, I mean, it is a lot of money, but like in the big governmental scope of things, $150,000 can happen really easy, really fast. And so what's going to change, whether that's, so obviously the foundation would potentially provide some benefit, but once again, we're in a very unpredictable situation where gathering funds in a fundraising effort might be much more difficult than it usually would be. So is there, I mean, expenses that are going to be cut so that you can float, you know, however much longer until the fundraising is established? Are there additional revenue sources that are being looked at? Once again, just the accountant in me knows that typically speaking, when you're already facing, you know, one threatening issue, there's a line of 10 more just waiting around the corner that you aren't aware of or just haven't thought that they're as threatening as they might be.
I don't have an answer other than say you're absolutely correct. And earlier I kind of said, to paraphrase, I think, we're just trying to survive tomorrow. So this right now is tomorrow, but you're absolutely correct. There's anything else that could take down David Street Station. If you wanted to know what could change outside of the foundation, you know, the city could drop a lot of money in our lap. I think that's the challenge. Everybody thinks that David Street Station is the city of Casper and that we get 1 cent funding, and we're really just scrappy behind the scenes, trying to do whatever we can to pinch a penny, just like every other nonprofit here. The difference is we are under the guise of a governmental entity in the Casper Downtown Development Authority. I can tell you there have been conversations like, let's go have a conversation with the city and see if they have any money to help us out. I mean, this is for the good of the community. Much like this contract, we have another contract, an MOU with the city, and it basically says, again, different city council, different city manager, city attorney, basically said $3 million from the city in 1 cent funds to build David Street Station. Any shortfalls are your own. We're out. So we're dealing with shortfalls right now, and we're trying to figure it out.
Councilman Pacheco.
Thank you. This is probably a question for Carter too. So if we did overlook this last year, obviously it's not going to have a major impact on us. I mean, obviously every penny counts and everything like that, but certainly understand. But if you could maybe speak to that, Carter, if we did forgive this.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Pacheco, if indeed council were interested in forgiving the lease payment balance, what I would recommend is an amendment to the contract that would clean all that up and restore the understanding so that indeed there wouldn't be that relic language moving forward. In terms of the dependence on that revenue and so on, we are talking about $160,000, and that would have gone directly into the general fund for the operations for this year. And we weren't anticipating any revenue moving forward from this point on. So for sure, this would be an impact that would be realized this year, and nothing else beyond now anyway.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I look at this in light of, some of the capital projects we've had in the 7+ years I've been on council. And, we've built a number of fire stations. We have built some new facilities on the mountain. And what Councilman Lutz indicated, that this is really not a big number for us to absorb. When I look at the potential revenues from our 1-cent taxes, we are a bit ahead. And I guess that I look at the investment that the $3 million that we put in up front as council members to make this happen, I don't want to see that investment risked. I think we've got money in there, and plus we've got all the other capital that individuals have put in there, and it really has become the centroid of downtown. And no matter how we look at it, I think while we're risking something, I look at the risk of $150,000 versus, what eventually is become a $10 million project that everybody is proud of. I mean, the governor has even stated that. This is cool. And I don't look at it as a major risk, and I would like to concur with what Carter says. We would have to make a budget amendment, but I think from where I sit, I'm looking at things that are transpiring that might offset that, even right now. Thank you.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for letting me amend my previous answer to Councilman Pacheco and actually Councilman Hopkins. The reality is we did not anticipate a revenue stream from this lease for this fiscal year. And so an amendment would not be needed for this fiscal year. And so we really didn't build any dependence on this revenue stream for current fiscal year. We have in years past, and those revenues did come through. So just to clarify, thank you. I appreciate that.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is also for Carter. Carter, with those, the $300,000 of improvements that the DDA made to that building, which was required by the state before they would accept the move, if I remember correctly, given those improvements, do you have any guesstimate as to what that building is worth now? I know we haven't done a formal appraisal on it, but.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Powell, I would probably need to defer to Liz with respect to any historic information along those lines, or Kevin, unless you know. But I'm not aware of what that building would be worth today. I know that if we tried to sell it today, we'd have a real challenge because there's quite a bit of commercial office property on the market right now. So from a market standpoint, I think that'd be quite a bit different than what perhaps it would appraise for. But I don't have current figures.
Would it be fair to say it's well in excess of $1 million?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Powell, I think it would appraise for more than $1 million.
So just doing the math, we've already received over $400,000 in lease payments from the DDA. So if we have $1 million building, and that's probably conservative, we have realized $400,000 worth of rent. And so in essence, we've gotten quite a deal on this building, meaning that it's worth well in excess of what we still have into it, since we've already received all of this lease money. So I think the reason I bring that up, I think it's good for people to realize that this purchase is a significant asset owned by the city, and that the DDA has done a great deal to defray the cost that we originally paid for the building. And so forgiving lease payments now is not really a cost to the city because we still own the building. And the building is worth far more than what we currently have into it, if I'm stating that correctly. And
Mr. Mayor, I would agree with that. Yeah.
So I just think it's good for people to realize that we're not giving anybody anything. We have the building.
Any other questions? Councilman Kathy?
The one thing that I'm concerned about is actually exactly what Vice Mayor Lutz was alluding to, is we're sitting here being asked right now to forgive $150,000, but what is your business plan going forward to where you aren't here in May, when it's time for us to come up with a budget, asking for more money again? And that's really what my biggest concern is. And actually, that was the concern 7 years ago when we were told, and we told the DDA, here's your $3 million, we're out of this. I realize what everybody else is saying, it's a big asset, but there were commitments made, and we're being asked for another commitment, but we need to figure out a plan going forward to know what our continued commitment is going to be, or, well, basically the business plan going forward. Because if we don't have a business plan to generate the money, then this $150,000 starts to become a drop in the bucket to us.
Would you like me to address that? I wasn't sure. Oh, please. Well, I don't know that I have the right answer, but again, this is gonna come off as kind of flippant to this council, but I just want everyone that maybe wasn't around during those times or maybe doesn't know all of the ins and outs of a DDA to understand that we're this weird little arm of the city council or the city of Casper where essentially you guys are mom and dad. That's how I say it. I don't own David Street Station. We gifted it back to the city. If we default on our lease, it's yours. So again, that's not to say we can have that conversation when it comes, but we can't take out, there's a lot of limitations to what we can do as a DDA because of our structure. So if we wanted to take out a loan or a bridge loan, we can't do that without coming before city council, asking you to approve that, because any defaults we have, you inherit as the city council. I don't know if that's the answer you wanted to hear. I can tell you, I'm pretty proud of the fact that we've made over $423,000 in rent payments, plus carrying costs of $150,000 in utilities at no cost to the city, improved your asset, carried it for 5 years. And I'm proud of the investment. I mean, look, we just looked at an $8.5 million investment before this. Would this be here if David Street wasn't? I don't think so. Would the $50 million all around downtown be here if David Street wasn't? Would the state office building? I mean, I'd like to think we had a significant push and nudge. I know the state was going to do it possibly regardless, but they were all part of this too. So I'm proud of the work. I certainly don't look at it lightly. I'm more embarrassed than anybody. I've got to be up here, my name attached to breaking a contract and defaulting on something and looking like a deadbeat. But the reality of the situation is there's no good outcome for the city. Either we pay you and liquidate our assets and dissolve the DDA and David Street Station, or we work on an agreement to amend the contract to eat the 150. We continue with the carrying costs, and we keep going on trying to survive 2020. My goal has just been, since this happened, get through the winter. We weren't in this big of a dire strait before this. Just an example, we were set it up for a banner year. We had $135,000 in sponsorship commitments before this. We limited our season really to just August concerts, and we were able, of that 135, we were able to net $30,000. So right off that, there's $100,000 in corporate partners that left. Everything's down. The business plan, it's never been about to make money, but it has been to sustain. Not being able to do operations has crushed us.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it is a good question that you both raised regarding the ongoing funding of the DDA. And I have told you, I have mentioned on several occasions that I'm concerned about the limited revenue sources that the DDA has as far as just running their basic operations. This organization has created the David Street Station, which we currently own, and which is highly valued by the entire community. Surveys have been done with the people who have made the investments in our downtown area, and they have repeatedly stated that they may not have made those investments if the David Street Station didn't exist. So that's a significant financial benefit to the community and to the city in terms of our tax revenues. And so when we did create the station, if you recall, we budgeted $200,000 to help with the marketing and getting the station up and running, which I believe was for 2 years. Is that right, Kevin? If you remember correctly?
That was just before my time when I came in.
Okay.
I can't remember off the top of my head, but 200 sounds just about right.
And I bring that up because I guess it creates, there is some precedent for the city saying, look, having this being a functional operation benefits the entire city of Casper. And the DDA is not an outside organization. It is us. It is the city's creation. And I think the city has some responsibility to make sure that it is adequately funded. And so this is not the right time to bring up another financial obligation that the city should undertake. But in terms of the long-term funding, I don't know how the DDAs in the other communities are funded, but I know ours has the smallest budget of any city, above, what, 15,000 in Casper, in Wyoming. And I just remember that when we went through all of that, that our funding sources were far lower than the other DDAs that were trying to accomplish similar or carry out similar functions. So I quite frankly think that the city really should have some buy-in to the operations of the DDA so they don't have to come back with an ad hoc problem, and that their funding is more sustainable over time. Look at what they've accomplished and what they've done for this community. It's not $50 to $60 million of investment in our downtown. It's not a small matter. Owning an $8 or $9 million or $10 million facility that wouldn't be there if the DDA hadn't done everything that they've done is not a small matter. Owning the Ash Street building that they've helped us pay basically half of its value in those lease payments is not a small matter. So I don't think we should basically say to them, you've got to come up with a plan. I think it should be the council's responsibility to come up with that plan.
Councilman Pacheco.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm on the right track with Charlie here, and what I want to say is a couple things. Is we can sit and look at it and say, oh, their business plan didn't work, and this and this and that. First of all, COVID hit, and it decimated not only many businesses and other people, but it decimated the David Street station. So they had zero, and I'm pretty sure you had pretty close to zero events. Maybe you had a few events, but nothing that you're able to do. And so for us to look back and say, well, you better do a business plan. Well, their business plan went out the window when COVID hit and they couldn't do anything. So for us to sit there and do that and to sit and say, well, what's your business plan? Well, COVID hit. So I think that's a moot point. But the second part of it is that the city is going to have to start looking at David Street State or the Downtown Development Authority as part of their arm and not let them flutter out like a leaf and just let them be and do whatever or just deal with whatever. We have to figure that out. And I know the economy is not great right now. I know things aren't super good. And we've talked about this in other ways, that it's tough to make decisions financially. But at some point, when things turn around in this city, we're going to have to look at the DDA and figure out a way to help sustain them, because that mill levy is not enough. We knew that when I first got on council 6 years ago, we knew that mill levy is not enough, and we have to figure that out. So I'm going to support forgiving this, and a big reason because COVID hit. It's not like they came in here and they were mismanaging how they were doing their funds. I support it because it was something, and they are a part of the city. They are the DDA. They're a part of the arm of our city, and so we need to take that responsibility.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Hawley, I really want you to know that, I know speaking for myself, and I think I'm pretty comfortable talking for everybody else on the council, we're not feeling that you need to be in here on the carpet, being raked around and kicked around about any of this. So please don't feel that way. I know that you're in here saying, hey, geez, we need some money, and and that, but please don't feel that, anyone's casting any aspersions at you or anything like that, or, that anybody's, enjoying the idea that you're, or even that you're on the carpet here having to do this. I really want to say that. What I'd like to say about this is that, if we were a hard-nosed business operation sitting here saying, well, we're going to try to get every dollar out of things that we can, we would sit here and say, well, yeah, we got a pretty good deal when we bought this building, but we have a contract here, and the lessee on our contract owes us this money, and by God, we want the money out of them. And so that is money that the city is technically, legally, by contract entitled to. But the question that I see is that, with reference to the overall big picture, is it a better financial decision for the city to insist that that money that is contractually due to us, that we get that, or is it more better in the big picture of things to say, well, yeah, I guess here's another $150,000 that we got to kick into this operation down here to try to keep it floating along and keep it functional. That's really what we have to decide. And, we're far enough into this, and again, you can look backwards and think, boy, was this all a good deal in the first place, or was it a viable deal or not? But once again, we are where we are now. We're not where we might or might not have been several years ago. We're where we are right now. And is it in the city's interest to insist that these guys fork over that money now, or is it in the city's overall best interest to just say, hey, we're going to forgive this? That's the question we have to answer. And it's certainly not a negative reflection on Mr. Hawley or any of the downtown development people. It's just where we are.
Vice Mayor Lutz first, and I'll come back to you.
So when we're talking about forgiving something through January 2022, I think we probably want to be a little bit cautious about just insinuating that that's caused by COVID, because we have no idea what the COVID anything looks at this rate past tomorrow. I mean, every day, everything changes. And I'm definitely not implying that we need to see past business plans, because frankly, none of that matters at this point. What is what is. But I do think that we owe it to the taxpayers who we represent to do our due diligence, in the sense of, if we are going to forgive a debt that's owed to the city, I think that it needs to obviously be discussed or looked at. Okay, well then, how do we not end up in the same boat tomorrow or next week? I don't think the city council needs to say elaborate plans, but I think the question needs to be asked about, just generically speaking, I understand that the foundation will be bringing in money, but what do we think about a timeline for that? If we know that we can't have events, are there certain expenses that can go away until we are at a point where we can resume events, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's just a thing of, if I know that COVID happened, but if we're just going to say that, well, let's just watch this because of COVID happened, I'm going to go ahead and guess that the city has other contracts with businesses or establishments that have been affected by COVID. And so are we just going to set a precedent that any business that can argue they've been affected by COVID, their debt is forgiven to the city? I understand that that seems a little extremist, but that's how this stuff works, and I know you guys know it is. And so I think we just need to pump the brakes a tiny, tiny bit. I'm not saying yes or no that we forgive this in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying that we do the due diligence as the people representing the taxpayers to make sure that once we forgive this, we're not just basically putting ourselves in being in the same boat tomorrow. And that's not your intention in any way, shape, or form. Obviously, you guys want to exist and continue just as much as we want you to exist and continue. I just want to make sure that we're doing the work that needs to be done to make sure that we asked those questions and looked ahead enough to make sure that it wasn't just buying time, it was helping them extend permanently, not just buying time until the next crisis happens a month, 2 months, 6 months next year, and then it's over. And so that's all I ask, is that we just do our due diligence as city council before we pull that trigger.
Vice Mayor Lutz, if I may, and just for a point of clarification, I think the difference between any other contract holder the city has is that if you wanted to enforce that and potentially sue any other contract holder, in our case, you would essentially be suing yourself. and the city. And I just want to make it clear as we talk, the attorney says no. So here's what would happen from my perspective. And again, this is going to look really crass, and it's not an ultimatum. I'm just trying to give you the reality. Kevin Hawley has no obligation to Davis Street Station. I do it because I love it, not because I'm getting rich. I could just say, you know what, I'm not going to be the director anymore and go do something else. The staff could do the same thing, and the board could do the same thing. What that would leave is Davis Street Station and the DDA in the arms of the city. And what that would look like is if it costs us $750,000 to $800,000 to operate, it would likely look, if the city wanted to operate it, $1 million from the general fund, and or saying we're going to issue an RFP and have another nonprofit run it or create it, and frankly, they'd be in the same boat as us. So I just wanted to put it out there. I think we are doing the city a service by operating it and saving the city money. Just as, I just want to make sure my staff and board knows that I support them and I appreciate all that they do, because no one's doing it to get rich. Sometimes I think we wish we were the city and had the city benefits and pay. We operate as a nonprofit, essentially.
Councilman Bates.
Thank you, Mayor. There's lots that go through my mind, and I'm not a business owner and I'm not an accountant, and so some of the stuff I say may not come out correctly or sounds bad. But as Councilman Pell pointed out, that he's been talking about David Street and its fundings and stuff, but that was also talked about clear back in February, March, April time, kind of before COVID, that they were struggling financially. I think that to a point, we need to take that into consideration and look at the finances prior to COVID and see where they were at. No disrespect, but had there been financial mistakes being made that's been costing that shouldn't have been? I don't know. I haven't ever looked at their books and never want to, but it's something that as a business, they are a business, and if they're not operating it correctly by chance, that is something we need to look at with it. But with that in mind, as he pointed out, as we look at this, if they turn around and say, we're done, that's on us now. So that's a financial burden that we take on. My last one, and I guess question is if we forgive the 150, Kevin, Mr. Early, you said that you applied for 1 cent fundings. People have asked you, why haven't you asked for that 1 cent funding? You, if I remember correctly, you said, how can I ask for 1 cent funding when I owe them this? So if we forgive the 150, where does that leave us with the 1 cent funding that is technically owed to them? Is it we don't accept it, then where does that 1 cent funding go? How does that work, I guess? Or is it we forgive the 1 cent, the 150, but we still owe them the 1 cent funding of 2014, did you say? Or did you put
It's
year?
roughly $14,000.
14,000.
And just as clarification, part of my proposal was to say we won't accept that. You can write us a check and then we'll just write you a check back and you can put it in the general fund. It doesn't matter to me. To me, it was more of a point of principle. If you owe somebody $150,000, how are you going to collect on a debt from them, but you're not going to pay your debt to them? But, and then, sorry to follow up, but I do want to say as part of an arm of the city of Casper, and I get you guys have 10,000 boards that you're probably part of, but you receive our monthly financials every month. We're part of the city. We're part of your audit. You can look through our books whenever you want. I mean, if you want to go look for mismanagement or anything, it's all in there, and dealing with Porter Muirhead on the audit every year. So there's no big conspiracy or secrets out there financially.
Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Hawley just covered what I was going to respond with to Councilman Bates. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I only look at, after living in this state a long time, most of my life, I look at what we've done with the school districts over the last 6 years. We have spent a lot of money on schools because we neglected taking care of the schools. There was no capital budget to speak of for repair of our schools. And right now, our schools in Natrona County and most of the state of Wyoming are in much, much better shape than they were because we had some pretty good times. And the legislature in Cheyenne said, no, we've got to do something with schools. We have got a lot of new buildings in Casper, and we've got a lot of new buildings around the state. And for us to walk away from an $8 to $10 million investment for something less than 2% would be, in my opinion, just not good business sense. I would not walk away from my house if I had to spend 1 or 2% on it to maintain it. That would be, it's just not smart. And for us to do that, with the case of Davis Street Station, it wouldn't be any better sense. So I suggest we proceed with making this happen. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Cathy.
Well, I think part of this goes right back to what Vice Mayor Lutz and I have been stressing, is that I don't mind forgiving the $150,000, but this is just like in my business. If I go down to the bank and say, hey, I can't make the payments, you can have all of this, or you can forgive it, they would say, okay, if I forgive it this time, what's going to happen next time? What's your business plan going forward to where you don't keep coming back here year after year wanting more money? And that's my whole point with this whole thing. The $150,000, like we've all said, is not that big of a deal for the investment. But I want to know what's going forward so we don't wind up with an $850,000 bill dumped in our lap when 7 years ago we were told they could take care of it. That's all I'm asking, and that's all I think this council and the city deserves, because we keep talking about funding the DDA. That is downtown development. That isn't helping the Kohl's Plaza. That isn't helping the theaters out there. That isn't helping the people out around the Walmart. We are spending tax money to help a certain select group of downtown businesses, which to me, that isn't right either, to keep dumping money into that. They may be an arm of the government, but if they want to develop their business downtown, they need to be funding it. Otherwise, we need to set up then other business development areas around town to throw tax money at other businesses, because that's what several of the people here are advocating, is that we need to give the Downtown Development Authority more money. All that's doing is subsidizing the businesses downtown at the sacrifice of the rest of the businesses in the city. And so I have an issue with that as well.
Well,
I'm done. I've said my piece.
Councilman
I'm sorry,
Hopkins.
but the DDA does tax the businesses downtown. If they wanted to have a development authority, they can do so through. But DDA does tax themselves to do this.
But I just heard from the other council members that we need to figure out a way to give them more money. That's what I didn't like.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, if I may, I actually, Councilman Cathy, you and I probably have more in common than you think. I just wonder, as we talk through this, maybe it does make more sense than Davis Street Station is operated in contracts as a 501c3 with the city. I know times have changed, but it wasn't unheard of in the past with 1 cent funding going to support community nonprofits that do the work, yada, yada, yada. But I don't know. I really don't know what the answer is. If you guys want a more heavily vested seat at the table, I can tell you what the business plan is. It's every other nonprofit. Fundraise, fundraise, fundraise. It's not easy. I mean, what we have to sell is the community experience, the kids. I mean, would you trade what we have now for the challenges that we're faced? And I hate to say once bitten, twice shy, but in 5 years since we've been operating this or building and operating it, this is the first time we've been back saying, we screwed up, you know? And the screw up that we had was on the curveball that we got at the end. That was, we want to add 2 more years to the tune of $500,000 to your contract. And again, what do you say to the governor and the top elected? It's like, no, we're going to negotiate this. If we didn't do it, we wouldn't have David Street Station. If we didn't have David Street Station, we wouldn't have the downtown and the thriving community that we do now. So I'm proud of what we did. And I would entertain, if you think that might be one of the routes to go to stop some of the convolution of you know, DDA and David Street Station. I get it. It's really confusing. Also confusing to try and fundraise around it. Why the hell am I donating money to the city?
Vice Mayor Lutz.
Just a brief comment, because I'm kind of getting the impression that maybe my comments were misunderstood, which is possible. I'm talking more numbers in my head than I am in anything else. I'm 110% not against forgiving this. I just think that I have a responsibility to the people that I represent to make sure that my due diligence is done. So I'm not saying that like this should be off the table. I'm just saying that I think we should ask more questions and do more research.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we're all in different ways talking about the same things here. What I'd like to suggest is, you know, that we move forward with basically 2 prongs here. One being that with reference to this $150,000, I don't think we have much of a choice. I don't like this. I want to make that clear. I'm not happy about this, but I don't think we have much choice at this point but to forgive that, or at a minimum, suspend collection of it until hopefully things might get better. And then also to sit down with the DDA and hopefully help them work out a long-term plan so that the things that Vice Mayor Lutz and Councilman Cathy are talking about don't come to fruition in 6 months, a year, or 2 years. And Mr. Hawley, I don't think you or your group want to be back in here in the future, you know, and I really mean it when I say I don't think anybody likes the idea or has a comfort level with the idea of that you're in here in essence on the carpet there trying to explain this and work something out with it. And certainly nobody harbors we harbor disappointment that we're at this stage, as I think you do. But I think, though, that we really need to move forward, and I think those 2 paths are what we need to do.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, Carter, this shows information only, but obviously you're needing direction on this evening. And so the direction I'm looking at is that we can either forgive it, or as a few have said here, move on for further discussion on how we really want to approach this, or a third option, I guess, is looking at a long-term payback plan. So I guess we can take them one at a time and see where council's at with it. And also, by the way, Councilman Johnson should be on the phone. So he is not here, but he is here. So, so I guess when we look at the first option itself of forgiving the debt altogether for the DDA.
Mr. Mayor, if I might make a suggestion here. The option of, in essence, delaying this, is that anything that is even remotely viable or that we should even be considering or thinking about?
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Huber. Certainly, I think if that is more in line with what the council would like to see, I would still recommend an MOU between the city and the DDA along the lines that council would define this evening or at a future meeting, and certainly we could bring that back in the form of a minute action for formal approval.
I may have misunderstood. I thought Councilman was suggesting that we temporarily forgive this and do a study when we have more information next year. Is that
Well, I was kind of suggesting that, but if we have a thumbs up or thumbs down, make some sort of a decision to forgive this, then that would seem to me that we're forgiving it, and subject to ultimate council approval at a meeting, but that we're forgiving it, and then it would be a bit academic to come back and say, oh, well, but do we want to just try to work out a way to delay collection on this? So I think that what we need to decide is, do we want to, in essence, delay collection, as oftentimes banks do? They sit there, well, okay, we know you're having tough times. You don't have to make this payment, but you still owe the money, but we'll let you pay it sometime in the future when things are better. Do we want to do that, or do we want to just flat out forgive that? There's kind of two things there, and then Councilman Hopkins, we can get on to the idea of kind of trying to work something out in the future.
I'm there.
Yeah, I didn't express that really well before, but that's what I'm suggesting, Mr. Mayor.
That's implicit.
Okay, so two options on the table. Either we forgive it, or if we decide not to forgive it, then we can have a discussion as to how long we'll put that off, what that'll look like, as far as another agreement in putting that payment off. So I guess just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down when it comes to forgiving the debt. Looks like Councilman Johnson. Actually, I think we had a majority of it anyways.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I got you.
Okay, yeah, I said my thumb was down.
Okay.
I like Councilman Huber's option.
Okay, so then for not forgiving it, we'll move forward with a plan. Is that something that we need to set up at another future council meeting then, or a work session?
Mr. Mayor, we can work with DDA to put together a proposal.
Okay.
For council to consider. And I think that's going to have to be in the new year. So we've got one more meeting next week, and I don't know that we can put together something that substantive within the next few days, if that's okay.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor and Mr. City Manager, I know that Mr. Hawley and his group, they need to have some level of comfort and some level of certainty with where this is likely to be going in the future. I know there are at least 3 of us that are not going to be sitting around here beyond this month. But what my suggestion at this point would be that we say, okay, that in essence, we're going to give you a 2-year extension on this, with the possibility that it might still be forgiven at some point, if a future council decides that's what they want to do, but that we give these people the certainty of a 2-year extension on this money so that they know where they are moving forward. Hopefully, by 2022, things will be on somewhat of an even keel for everybody and that. And so what I would like to suggest is that we basically grant a 2-year extension on this, with the possibility that it still might end up being forgiven if a future council wants to forgive that. Because they need to know going forward, are we going to slam the door on them next month or something,
But you can't leave town, Kevin.
Okay. I mean, you've been waiting for a $116,000 check for about 1.5 years from me, and you haven't got it yet, so.
So, Mr. City Manager, is that something that we can at least do the extension in our next meeting? We could do it for that period, for a 2-year period of time, if that's what's being proposed here?
Mr. Mayor, I think that would be a caveat that we could build into the proposal if council's comfortable with that timing. And you use that as a piece of what it is that we bring back for a formal proposal. So I wouldn't say we need to talk about it next week again, if that's all right with all of you.
Okay, so we can just do that?
I think so, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. And then I have, I guess, one last question. Repayment of this doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of cash either, correct? And I think we've talked about it before, of like in-kind donations or something to that effect. Am I going down the right road here?
Mr. Mayor, I think that's quite a possibility, and certainly if council's okay with that concept, we could build that into the proposal as well.
I'd like to look at all different avenues, so it's not a matter of, you know, maybe you have something to add to that, but so it's not a matter of cash. I mean, if there's another way of working it out, I'd like to look at all different avenues we could take.
Mr. Mayor, Council, one of the things we talked about previously was Davis Street Station then, or excuse me, DDA then managed the City of Casper parking garage in First and Center lot. We paid annually to have that through a private company, snowplowed, so we said, well, why don't we use the monies we pay and we'll get our own snowplow and maybe we can do contract for services and work off our debt that way without having the parking garage contract anymore. And frankly, if you want to talk about looking at our books and seeing where a deviation of income and expenses comes from, losing that parking garage hurt us quite substantially. So when we talk about potentially defaulting on this, I would add that as a caveat on top of COVID. But I don't know what we could do, but we're certainly open to it.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cathy.
I know Councilman Huber suggested a 2-year extension. I would just as soon get this taken care of within the next year. I think waiting 2 years down the road is kicking the can down the road to where then you're looking at potentially another new council. So I think this needs to be shortened up to where this would only be a 1-year extension.
I would agree with that, but if we could still keep the 2-year in place, I mean, obviously, we want to get on top of it as quickly as we can, but if something happens and we happen to go a year and a day, I don't want to have to come back and have this conversation again, personally, myself, unless somebody else would like to see it shortened to a year. Okay. All right. Do we have anything else on this?
Thank you for the opportunity, and I apologize to anybody that was behind me because that was not 20 minutes. Thank you again.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the downtown speed limits. Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, as a question of privilege from the chair, we do have citizens here who are interested in item number 7. If it pleases the council, and like I said, your privilege, would you all be willing to move that up and allow our citizens to hear what dialogue would be contained with this item?
Okay. We've got to hit them all anyway, so I guess let's move them around. Let's go to, we'll put downtown speed limits off for a moment and go to massage therapy ordinance number 7. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a follow-up item with regard to some suggestions that stakeholders in this conversation have provided within the last 2 readings of this ordinance. Council asks that we bring this into this forum to prepare for the 3rd reading in the event that amendments could be considered, again, pursuant to some of the suggestions that your stakeholders on this matter have provided. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could defer some of that conversation to Mr. Henley to guide us through what some of those might have been, and we can go from there, or Mr. Cathy, Councilman Cathy, whomever you'd prefer.
All right, Mr. Henley. Okay, Councilman Cathy, let's go with you.
Okay. To start off with, one of the first things that was brought up was that and actually it's already been proposed, is that we have changed at the last, sorry about that. At the last meeting, Councilman Huber proposed to change it from being a certified to a licensed massage therapist, which that passed, so that change has already been made. Then it was pointed out that we didn't have a definition for a licensed massage therapist. And so if you look in the packet, amendment number 1 alludes to the definition of a licensed massage therapist. Means a person who has obtained a permit to practice massage therapy or body works from the city of Casper. So that would take care of that particular proposal. Then item 2 was, it was mentioned at the last meeting that what about the people that come to town with their own massage therapists, like the sports teams, the dance venues and things. And actually, Amendment 2, if you've read through that, pretty well covers that. The one thing that was mentioned that I got in an email today is in item A1. It basically refers to professional, collegiate, or amateur sports organizations. Then it says dance troupe or other athletic organization. And I guess one of the things that I would think we possibly ought to change in that, which came out from an email we received earlier today, is that actually there are other things other than dance troupes that would possibly be bringing those along. And one of the things I think about is, I know you can't believe that I actually watch J-Lo's concerts, but basically, they have all of the dancers and everything in the background. So those, I could see them bringing something along. A lot of the concerts are going that way. Garth Brooks jumps all over the place in his. So instead of dance troupe, maybe that should be a professional performing arts group, which that would cover then the concerts and all of those types of things. So that's something, and I just came up with that in the last 2 hours, Mr. Henley, so I apologize for that. But that was when I was able to get to my emails. And then it goes on to reference Special Olympics. I think a lot of the rest of that pretty well self-defines it. One of the other things that I think we could possibly discuss was they were talking about, and in one of the emails, potentially having the out-of-towners apply for a temporary permit, which gives the dates they would be here and potentially charge a fee for that. I don't know if we want to go there or not, but that's something that we can discuss as a group there in amendment number 2. Amendment number 3 was changing some of the grandfather clause parts, and it says actively practiced in Casper, Wyoming for at least 2 of the last 3 years from the effective date of the ordinance, and graduated from a school of massage or massage therapy, a program approved by the clerk's office, which may be proven by presentation of a diploma or by providing credentials or a professional portfolio, which the professional portfolio gets to those people that have basically started off 20 years ago and have been practicing and maybe never did really go to one of these formal colleges, but basically they have a portfolio of the work that they have done and or passed an examination, which would be the MBLEX. But basically that then starts to take out specifically quoting the 500 hours and all of the other stuff that's in the to-date organizations. Am I doing okay so far, Mr. Henley? Okay. And if I'm misstating anything, feel free to interrupt. Okay. And then item number 4 talks about the business licensing part of it, and you have to have a licensed massage therapist on staff to be able to get a business license as a massage therapy business. That's amendment number 4. And then amendment number 5 is an exemption to this, which goes into the fact of physicians, basically the medical community. You know, if you go down, from what I understand from my wife and from some of the other people that go to the nail salons for manicures, pedicures, that when you get a pedicure, they rub your feet. Well, those people are exempt as well. So in essence, that's what Amendment 5 is doing, is taking out the old-time barber that takes the massager and rubs it around your neck, or, yeah. But basically, that's what amendment number 5 does. And so that's kind of where we are at, and would look at then proposing those 5 amendments prior to, or well, actually in the amendment section of the third reading, which I think that pretty well covers all of the questions and concerns that we received, that if it's going to go through, then these are the things that should cover those types of issues. It doesn't address the cost aspects or any of that, but this is to get the ordinance in shape to be a legitimate ordinance, which I think covers our concerns. It covers the other concerns about the other city ordinances, and pretty well covers most of the comments we have received from staff and from the public. So,
Okay.
comments?
Councilman Bates.
The only one, when you mentioned professional dance or whatever on amendment number 2.
Amendment number 2.
Yeah, you said professional, call it amateur sports organization, dance troupe, but then you wanted to change it to professional. I was just thinking professional or amateur. And or amateur in there, just so any of the little dance teams or something like that, you know, they're more amateur than they're professional. So just wanted to throw that in there because they may just very well have the same thing. I don't know, but I don't think it'd be that big of a deal, but that was one. The professional portfolio, I'm wondering if we need a definition of what that is, what that would consist of, because my fear is we're watering it down. More and more we keep adding that there, I mean, I guess it's professional portfolio of a massage. What does that look like? What does that consist of? Because I don't know. So could somebody that's running it just create a portfolio of however, and is that going to be accepted? So that I don't know. Maybe you could reach out to them and see what they would be thinking, or if anybody else has any thoughts. I just don't want to water it down too much that what's been allowed could still be allowed because of that. So that's just a thought I have regarding it. Besides those two, I really like it. It was well done.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that with reference to proposed amendment number 2, I think what we're all wanting to do there is to make Casper a welcoming place for if a team, if an event, if an organization or something, whether if it's Garth Brooks or whoever, comes to town and brings their own massage therapists, that we're not going to stick our fingers into that. And so I'm wondering if instead of all this language, not in any manner meaning to criticize all these words that are on here, I wonder if we could accomplish the same purpose if we were to simply say a person from outside of Casper who is here to provide services that would otherwise be require massage therapist licensure as a part of a specific event or service to a specific organization shall be exempt from the requirements of this ordinance. I wonder if we could accomplish all those same things by just saying, in essence, if you're here with a specific organization or with a specific event, that you're exempt from the ordinance. And I somewhat would invite Mr. Henley to comment on if he thinks that would be too broad of an exemption, or if that would accomplish what I think we all want to try to do here with reference to the folks from outside of town coming with specific events.
Mr. Henley?
Great, thank you, Mayor. I think, Councilman Huber, yeah, I think that we're kind of on the same wavelength there. The question, I think, would be probably whether that would provide enough specificity and have enough type of descriptors so that it would be an enforceable exclusion, or would it just be that you would never know, and if you happen to come across someone who was not a licensed therapist here in Casper, you would really never know that, and they could use the excuse, well, I came into town with such and such a group, and there could be some, covered group that they would be able to rely upon and say, oh yeah, we were just in Casper or whatever. It seems a little bit loose to me, Councilman, but I understand what you're trying to say, and it would be great to be able to come up with some words like that, but I'm thinking that one might be just a little bit too broad. The dance troupe, the theatrical or musical performers that might come into town, as Councilman Cathy was suggesting, I think fit along with what you're saying, but it is a long, specific enumeration if we list those out. But I think that at least then we have some type of a thought process to key off of. Without knowing the background of this specific kind of lengthy list, I don't know that just putting this in by itself would be sufficient to really let people know the parameters of those that can and those that should not be coming into town to practice licensed therapy.
Okay, well, you answered my question, and I would have to say that even though this printed out proposal uses a lot more words, I think it uses a lot more words for a reason, and so I think it's probably better than my blanket short kind of an exemption. So
Anybody else have anything on this? Councilman Cathy?
Does anybody have any comments about requiring a temporary license with a fee?
I don't see how that would be really practicable, because if
That was my concern, but I wanted to get, I wanted to get some other,
if Garth
I wanted to get somebody else in the boat rowing with me, okay?
Yeah, because if Garth Brooks comes to town, he's not going to send his massage therapist here a week ahead of time to get licensed.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Like I said, I wanted to bounce that off.
I'm smiling with you on that.
Thank you.
Okay, are we good on that?
So are we gonna, I'll work out the exact wording of how we want to do that on number 2 for the performing arts then with you, Mr. Henley, the next couple of days. So
Perfect, thank you.
we ought to be good to go then with these 5 amendments next week.
One at a time, or?
We need to go through them one at a time here tonight, or?
Mr. Mayor, if there's general accord that preparing the 5 for formal consideration next week, then the attorney's office can work with Councilman Cathy to get that ready based on the feedback we've gotten tonight. For the formal meeting, I would recommend that each amendment be considered separately, and therefore the opportunity to vote on each and bring them into the ordinance with respect to each one of them.
So for all 5 tonight to move forward to council, are we good with that?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, this is a work session, so it's not, public input doesn't.
Email me, Scott. Email me.
Okay, anything else on that, Mr. City Manager?
No, sir. Thank you for the direction, everybody.
Okay, we'll move back to the downtown speed limits.
Yes.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Council received an exhibit over the weekend that discussed this topic. And as you all know, this is a follow-up with regard to your request to potentially consider some changes downtown as it relates to speed and making things more consistent and everything else with surrounding areas. The Chief of Police, as well as Mr. Beamer, put a lot of work into this consideration, and we have a proposal for you this evening. Council can certainly look at it and tell us you're not interested, or you can support the changes or ask us to do more homework. We're open to any of the three. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll try to get an exhibit up here for you and our audience to look at. And if I could defer to the chief and Mr. Beamer to walk us through some of these details, I'd appreciate that.
Okay. Mr. Beamer?
Mayor, council, if you want to go vote right now, I'm okay with that as well, Councilman Cathy, so.
I thought it was a great plan.
I'll let Carter get the exhibit up, but what you see on the exhibit, everything on green and red is part of the current ordinance right now. And that defines all of those streets as 20 miles per hour. That ordinance was adopted, I believe, sometime back in the mid-'80s, which obviously this community was different back then. But we have proposed to take out all of the streets essentially north of First Street and east of Walcott out of that downtown 20 mile per hour core. We have proposed to take out everything south of Collins that you see extends past David and Center and Walcott essentially to 6th Street. We're looking to take out everything east of Kimball out of that downtown 20 mile per hour zone. Keep in mind that the NIC sits right there at the intersection of Kimball and 2nd and Collins. So that's why we thought it would be nice to keep that as part of the core downtown 20 miles per hour. The only additions we're proposing to make is the extension of the OYD. Right now, the downtown speed limit ends at Spruce Street. OYD extends to Poplar Street. We are in the process of making the improvements along Midwest to Spruce as we speak. The last phase will incorporate the remainder of Midwest to Poplar with all those pedestrian amenities and biking amenities at that same time. It was interesting to note that the current ordinance includes First Street, which is a state route. It also includes the frontage road along the interstate, which is also a state route, which we don't have a lot of jurisdiction on. So, but with that, Mayor, Council, I'll certainly entertain any questions.
Good.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
Just really quick, just so I'm clear, so First Street would no longer be part of it, correct?
That's correct. Everything you see in red, we were proposed to take out.
To 30, or sorry, to move it to 30.
Yeah, to take it and to be part of the default speed limit, which is 30 miles per hour.
Okay.
Everything in green, we propose to stay the same. Yep. And everything in blue, we propose to add to the 20 mile per hour.
Perfect.
Core downtown speed limit. Just to be clear. Good question.
Councilman Huber?
Looking at A Street, am I remembering correctly that the intersection of A and Durbin, is that a four-way stop or is that just a stop sign north-south on Durbin? I always get confused about that, especially when I'm driving through that intersection.
It's essentially, you're stopped on A Street at David Street. You've got free movement north-south on David.
On Durbin. I meant Durbin Street. If I said David, I meant.
Are you talking about A and?
A and Durbin.
Oh, A and Durbin.
Stop sign.
A and Durbin is a stop sign. It's a two-way stop.
North-south.
Or north-south.
Is it a stop east-west or north-south? I don't remember.
East-west.
Because if that's an east-west stop, I really wonder if that makes sense to have that one block, bump up to 30 there, if it would make more sense on that street to have it changed east of Durban. I'm asking, I don't know. If it probably doesn't matter that much,
Nothing but a flush that staff and PD thinks is reasonable, and certainly we will defer to council's direction.
yeah, oh, okay, thank you.
Councilman Cathy.
The only other thing I was going to ask, beach between Fifth and Collins is 20 mile an hour right now. Are you proposing to leave that then as the 20 mile an hour?
I'm sorry, Councilman, beach between where and where?
Between Fifth and Collins?
Correct. It's proposed to leave that as 20 miles per hour.
Okay.
Between, all the way between First and Collins, leaving that as 20 miles per hour. That's correct. You're correct, leaving that as 20 miles per hour. It currently is 20 miles per hour.
Yes. That's all I was asking. Okay.
Did you say First and to Collins or Fifth to Collins?
Fifth and Collins. On beach.
Mayor, good clarification. No, everything south of Collins would be 30 miles per hour.
Right now, it is 20 between Fifth and Collins.
Well, then the map I'm looking at is not correct, but is proposed to take that back to 30 miles per hour.
Okay, that's all I was asking, because that is 20 mile an hour right in front of your house there, Bob.
When have you ever seen anybody do 20 miles an hour there?
I'm not gonna do
It's closer to 40.
go there.
Any other questions of Mr. Beamer? Okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Mr. Beamer?
Mayor, council, I don't. If you guys are okay with this, we'll start the ordinance process, which, as you know, is 3 readings. So it'll be a couple months here before this becomes law.
This, this is not going to turn into another Second Street, correct, by us? Not just saying.
No, we're not changing anything now. Right now, everything's staying the same.
Want to make
When,
sure.
when we do change the law, we'll take down some 20 mile per hour signs and just simply not put up anything. So it'll be a lot simpler.
Okay. Chief, have anything you wanted to add? No? Okay. So, Councilman Cathy.
I would just like to thank the staff in Mr. Beamer's office and Chief McFeeder's office for looking into this and the work they did. I know this wasn't easy to go through all of this, and I think we appreciate that, and I think the citizens will appreciate that. So thank you both, and your staffs.
So we can get a thumbs up or a thumbs down and move forward on this? Okay. We'll move forward. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to building permit requirements. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This too is a follow-up item pursuant to a council request to have the opportunity to be refreshed, if you will, with some basics as it relates to permitting and building plans and those kinds of things. Mr. Elston, in concert with Ms. Becker, have prepared some information for you tonight. The real purpose of tonight, like I said, is that of refreshing your understanding here, but also the opportunity for you to ask questions. And so we would absolutely invite your questions that any of this might stimulate, and then we'll go from there if council wants to see something additional.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I appreciate the opportunity to come forward, and I thank Mr. Hawley for taking his full 20 minutes, and my greatest desire that I go under as far as he went over. So anyhow, you guys, I was asked a question about what requires a permit. That's a very simple question, and I created a summary that I'd like to give Mr. Napier to hand out, and it's a one-page summary. When I was asked this question, I spent a numerous amount of time going through the codes and the ordinances, and Anyhow, our codes are, there's 9 code books and approximately over 4,000 pages of code references. And when you ask a simple question such as this, there's not a simple answer. So if you'll see, I gave a summary on the front, and that was boiled down. Originally, I gave to Mr. Collins, my boss, and Liz Becker, all the code references and the ordinances, and they looked at this thick packet and said, wow, this is a little deep. Well, that's why you hire a building staff, and you have contractors that work and inspectors. Each inspector and me as a building official, we hold contractors' licenses, and we have master licenses in our trades. And that is our job to research the codes and the ordinances and to enforce those things for those permits. So we get this question asked to us probably several thousand times a year. What requires a permit? So in that, if you are reading the summary, you will see that there are items that require a permit and there's items that don't. And basically a maintenance item does not require a permit. So if you're replacing some drywall on your wall, that doesn't require a permit. But if you're replacing all the drywall, it does. If you're replacing a window, that's maintenance. That doesn't require a permit. But if you're replacing numerous windows, that's repair. And so there's not a set requirement in the code that this requires and this doesn't. As a building official, it is my job to determine the intent of the code and those things that require a permit. And that is what we do. So, and then, you know, each project is unique and the permit requirements can be confusing for citizens. So we perform at no cost to citizens and contractors if they call for a consult to come to their project or their home and to see what they need to do and what permits are required. And as of this year so far, we have performed 217 of those consults. And then if you look down through the summary, you'll see the number of permits that we have issued this year so far to date is 4,288 for this year. And in those, I have to assume that maybe 20 permits have been contested, but I believe it would be less, but we don't track that, but all have been resolved with no conflicts. So typically when we get with the homeowner, the citizen, or the contractor, it has been a very smooth process to get that taken care of. So anyhow, simple question, difficult answers. I do have more copies that do have the code requirements for permits, and I have the ordinances also that are written that what requires permits and what doesn't. So if you guys would like them emailed to you, or if you want them for your information, I do have them that could be passed out also. And I can even go further. I did make copies of the actual codes. I took them out, made those copies and highlighted them, and the ordinances and highlighted those also. But it's been not an issue. Most people, if they don't get a permit, it is because they just did not understand they needed one. You see on the back of your summary there's a outline of examples of what requires a permit and what does not require a permit. We could create something like that and put on our website. My concern with that is people could look at that and say, okay, I don't need a permit, but they may actually do need that permit, but they don't contact us. It is a desire for them to contact us and ask us if they need permits versus look at something if it's not all exhaustive on the website and it's not covered there, or if they do it and then we say you should have had a permit for that and had it inspected, and then it's not inspected before it's concealed. Because that's what permitted work does. It allows us to have them call us for inspections, and we go and inspect that work to make sure it's according to code so that they have the safest installation possible for the citizenry. So with that, I would entertain any questions.
Councilman Cathy.
Are we actually supposed to call a Denver number for more information?
This was for illustration purposes only. Thank you, Councilman.
Okay.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So all of the times that I have replaced water heaters over the years, am I going to go to prison for
If I could get your address, Councilman Huber, we could discuss that.
But a water heat, a simple water heater replacement needs a permit?
Yes, it does require a permit.
Ooh. Well, I won't tell you how many of them I've done.
You have some?
Just as a question, is it because of the gas hookup and having to check the gas? Or is it because of the electrical and having to make sure it's hooked up right?
All of the above.
Mr. Mayor and
or all of
Councilman
the above?
Kathy, it's all of the above. And when
Okay.
you go to do a water heater inspection, most of the contractors, they submit their water heater inspections monthly because they might do 20 or 30 of those. And you think, well, that's a simple thing. But if the venting isn't graded properly, you can get CO2 gases in your home. If the gas line has a leak, you can get a minute leak or whichever, or be loose, or the electrical connections and such. And a water heater, if the P&T valve, the safety valve, was to have a plug on it, you have built a bomb, actually. And I've had a person on a project in Colorado I was working on that was killed because they used a water heater for a pressure device and it exploded. So it's for the safety of the citizenry for these inspections.
So what you're really saying is, as well, is that normally either the plumber or the electrician will actually pull the permit and then they turn them in monthly then?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
They've turned them in. The contractors are full aware that they need permits for those items and they pull them and then we inspect them, each and every one.
Okay. Looks like you're okay, Mr. Huber. They won't come after you now.
Well, and I can further elucidate on that. There's a citizen in Casper who might or might not have replaced a water heater that then leaked. Well, the one that was in there leaked, or at least this citizen thought that it was leaking. So this unnamed citizen replaced the water heater, and the problem was still there, still water showing up on the floor. So then a licensed plumber came in and looked at it and said, oh, you should have put in this pressure, one of those pressure canisters in the line because your water pressure going in was spiking. Not the pressure relief on the side of the tank, but this other diaphragm pressure thing. And he said if you had installed that in the first place, if this unnamed person had installed that in the first place, they wouldn't have had to put in a new water heater and then still have to install that. So I don't know who's dumb enough to do that kind of thing. But so there are some reasons for this. It's just surprising when I looked at this and saw that on the list there.
Councilman Bates.
Two things. One, for clarification, that you do not have to have a contractor come in and do it, but you can do it yourself, but you still got to pull the permit, correct?
If you're the homeowner and it's your primary residence and it's not for resale, you can pull the permit yourself and do the work. We discourage having homeowners hire a contractor and then the homeowner pull the permit. Many times when they do that, they're not aware that they are responsible because they are the permit holder and the contractor's not. So if a contractor says, why don't you pull the permit, it should raise a red flag. Okay?
Thank you for that clarification. And then, is each permit a different, I'm assuming you gotta pay for the permit. Is each one different for what you're working on? Or are they all the same, it costs the same to pull the permit?
There's an initial $35 permit fee, and then there is a scale that it goes by for the value of the work that you're doing, and that scale is the same for all work. So whether your plumbing system is $5,000 or your house is $500,000, it just goes off that scale.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Ellison, if, for instance, a water heater, if it's in a rental property, then needs to be a licensed contractor, is that right?
It should be a licensed contractor.
Well, should be or has to?
It is by code and ordinance, it is supposed to be a licensed contractor.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Ellison, what was the other document you said you had?
I have the codes and the ordinances. I have interpretations of them that I
Okay.
made in smaller form, if you guys would like them.
I would, and one of the new council members just sent me a text asking if they could have a copy also.
Okay? Okay, we'll get it.
Okay, okay. And I just want to say, I appreciate you putting this together. I know there's been a lot of questions as to when people need to pull permits and whatnot, and even on this thing, you know, looking at a lot of the houses that I deal with in my own industry, you have one on here that people working on basements are required to put egress windows in. Once they start working on that, I doubt very seriously from the amount of houses I've been through that have been remodeled that gets done. So that's interesting to see, and I'd be curious do we have the codes online that people can actually go in and pull everything up? Okay.
Yes, we have the code books. They're also at the library for people to look there, plus we have them online, plus our ordinances.
Okay.
And we are in the office for phone calls, which we take all day. Our 3 permit technicians are very well versed in what requires a permit. And if it needs to go beyond them, they send it to one of our inspectors or to myself. And we respond daily.
All right. Thank you. Is there anything else on this one? I would like to add, though, I think that the county just has a new building inspector now, which actually was Justin Smith, that used to work for us here, is now the new county inspector. So I think that's a good addition over there, my personal opinion.
I'm sorry,
Well, he retired and moved on, so Justin from the fire department. He was an inspector over there.
Not the Justin that's our current.
No.
Oh, okay.
No. Okay, we'll move on to the prostitution ordinance. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The genesis of this particular ordinance and proposal that you're discussing tonight is actually kind of a spin-off of the discussion from the massage therapy proposal that you've been reviewing and having dialogue on. It became clear to us that there were some weaknesses in the current ordinance that needed to be addressed and dealt with in a separate vein, if you will, a separate track, so as not to confuse the two items and convoluted discussion that didn't need to be made more complicated. So with that, the chief and the attorney's office came together and put the proposal that you have in front of you tonight in place so that indeed you could review it, ask some questions, and if you think it's appropriate for formal consideration. Obviously, in your case, it would be for first reading potentially next week if indeed we can put it together that quickly and go from there. So if it pleases the council, I'd like to defer the time and floor to Mr. Henley and Mr. McFeeters.
Okay, Mr. Henley.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Manager. In looking at this, there are really 3 prongs that at least I would kind of analyze it in that respect. One is basically just to update the language with respect to prostitution and its definitions, and it seemed like ours was a little bit weak in that regard, and so we've updated it, and you'll see that all in the red. One of the other items that was included, though, in the definition of prostitution was performance prostitution. Basically, we had kind of limited ourselves to some type of an intrusion with respect to the prior definition. This would basically then also cover acts of prostitution where one would be hired to either self-manipulate or manipulate another person for the pleasure of the person paying and obtaining sexual gratification from that. So we increased that. One of the other items, though, that was, it seems to me that would be fair and perhaps a little bit more appropriate would be to also not punish just the prostitute, but also those who would solicit prostitution. And even more important to that would be then the owners of the house or the business where the prostitution took place. So again, this would be some type of a prophylactic type of effort to keep those who would engage in this type of business away from our city, and let them know that we really don't appreciate that, and that we'll be looking at them, and if they should happen to slip through the cracks and get a license and are operating a business, that if we find out that they are financially obtaining benefits from this type of activity, they're going to lose their license, and they're also going to have committed a crime themselves. With that, we covered basically the gamut, I think, of the people that would be involved, from the prostitute to the person who would solicit it, the John, I guess is the term, to the business owner, and then the rest are some basic statutory provisions with respect to severability when you get into these type of things, just to show that if one section is deemed to be unconstitutional or like, then the other ones would still be the intent of the legislative body. We did change out one provision in section 9.24.005. I just looked at it today when I was rereading it, and we had in there the legislature hereby declares. It should be the governing body hereby declares. And so with your permission, I just put that in the ordinance for your first reading when it comes before you next week or in the first regular meeting in January. I think we'll probably establish next week and then have this up for the first meeting in January.
Mm-hmm. Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you. I noticed we're putting this together with the SO. I just wonder if there's any chance we could have one uniform ordinance within the county. And I know that would take meetings with all the other attorneys and so forth, but, you know, if we're trying to stop a problem, they're always looking for the places that have the least restrictive rules. And I just wonder if that might be at least an opportunity to have a meeting and say, look, guys, can we all agree on one ordinance that would cover the county?
Mr. Mayor, that would be a very admirable goal, but the county does not have the power to enact this type of ordinance. Out in the county, that's going to fall under the state statute. If the other municipalities want to enact this same type of an ordinance, we could get together with them and have uniformity among all the municipalities. But if you think you could get the legislature to get on board and do something, you know, welcome to about a 12-year fight.
I didn't know that. That's
yeah, the county, out in the unincorporated areas, that falls under the state statute.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Cathy.
I like the ordinance. I think it accomplishes what the chief and everybody else is looking for, and in cohort with the massage therapy ordinance, I wish that we could go ahead and defer this public hearing till after we've had the third reading of the massage therapy ordinance. I hate to have the third reading of the massage therapy ordinance with all of the amendments along with the first reading of this ordinance. That's the only favor I would ask.
But I think we have to establish a public hearing date.
I was thinking that might be the appropriate interface.
Okay, we're establishing public hearing, not,
Yeah. So that,
okay, I'm good.
Any other questions or comments? I'd like to comment on, I like the way this is written. I'll tell you from past experience, there's always been some sort of a loophole in this that we've found that, especially in human trafficking, of trying to make an arrest, but the acts that were taking place were not covered by the statute, and therefore our hands were tied, so to speak, and there was nothing we could do about it, and so we had to go back and change things. So I like the way this is written. It seems like it covers everything, and I think it's long overdue being written, so. Okay, so are we good with moving this forward? Okay, all right, thank you. All right, we'll move on to creation of CARES Act Fund. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is a step that we are required to take pursuant to the policies and so forth that council recently approved and passed, pursuant to the creation of a fund within the accounting structure of the city of Casper. What we're proposing is that indeed a fund be put together to receive care funds, dollars, if you will, so that as we move forward from this point on, we will not only have a consistent receipt body, if you will, or entity, but indeed the accounting structure that a fund, an individual and separate fund provides, gives us a high degree of transparency, a real clean audit trail, and certainly when it comes to some inquiry, which undoubtedly will come given the size of the funds that we hope to obtain and work through. We will have that ready for any single audits that might come up and everything else because of, again, its own accounting structure within the city's ledger. So we need the step to be taken on the council level, if you will, that gives us that authority to create that fund and then create thereby the repository for these dollars as they come into the organization.
Good. We good with the creation of this fund? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hopefully we fill it up.
Hopefully. All right, we'll move on to agenda review. Mr. City Manager.
As I mentioned, we are approaching our final meeting with this current council next week. And there are a couple things we wanted to go over with you in pre-meeting that we thought I'd like to make you aware of. First of all, as a, we call it a pre-meeting here on your agenda. I'm not totally wild about that designation, but we're hoping to offer some Robert's Rules orientation through the attorney's office next week. That would be one installment of that. We're offering another installment after the turn of the year through the attorney's office to get everybody up to speed that's coming onto the council. Certainly if the current council would like some refresher, if you will, you're welcome to come also. But nonetheless, that is a large part of what will take place prior to the pre-meeting next week. As far as the body of the pre-meeting is concerned, we would like to go over the budget calendar that we're proposing for fiscal year 22 with you. Believe it or not, we're already starting fiscal year 22. And we need your blessing and insight on that very critical document. We also would like to go over some information for you pertaining to lease agreements that we're entertaining proposals for as it relates to some of the remaining baseball fields that we have current agreements with that are set to expire. And so we have some information that we'd like to review with you and take questions on and so on. Obviously, as we've already mentioned, the third reading for the massage therapy ordinance will be underway and potentially wrapped up next week. And we too would like to initiate the I guess you'd say the final phase of annexation, including Robertson Road, the Robertson Road addition, that some of you attended a number of public meetings that we've had to date. Beyond that, those are sort of the highlights, if you will. And if there are any questions about the agenda for next week, we'd be happy to entertain them.
Councilman Cathy.
You'll be putting on there setting the public hearing date. Is there anything else that we should be setting public hearing dates for?
The only other thing, Mr. Mayor, if I could, and Councilman Cathy, is with regard to bringing forward some ordinance language that would eliminate the ordinances pertaining to underage tobacco use. And so we do need to take those steps, and it's possible that we'll start that process as well next week, too.
What are we gonna do about marijuana?
Oh, yeah. Don't even go there.
Anybody else got anything for under agenda review? Okay, legislative review, oh, Councilman Bates.
I brought it, sorry. Thank you, Mayor. I brought it up a while ago, and I know that we received it, about a month and a half ago regarding, vertical siding on houses. That was sent to me. And what through an email, but when I read the report on talking about the vertical siding and our ordinance, I really didn't see anything in there to why that's not allowed, to really what major problems or conditions or issues. So I know I'm walking off, but that is something that I would ask council to look at changing that ordinance, and discussing it at some future work session, possibly, to look at changing it. Some of the pictures, if you looked at them, some of the neat things that they've done on housing with vertical siding is actually, was kind of cool looking, and different. So, that's something I'd like to see future council to look at least discussion in a work session of changing that ordinance to allowing it.
Okay, anything else on agenda review? I guess I do have a question, going back to the pre-meeting next week with Robert's Rules. I guess the question, thinking about the youth council, is there a way that they could be in the room when that discussion takes place, or is that appropriate? Just because it is a very important part of what we do, and I think it helps out in allowing them to see, to understand the process and what Robert's Rules is.
No, I think that would be fine, Your Honor. The only question we would have would be social distancing. And, absent that, if we can work that out, I think that would be just fine. Or even, I know Mr. Trembath loves to do this, and so he would probably happily give them a special session.
All right, okay. All right, sounds good.
If I might.
Oh, Councilman Hopkins.
In addition to Robert's rules, when some of us came on council, we had council rules that were actually developed from Robert's rules. And it was a little book we all got, and I don't know that council has gone over that since about the first time you and I were elected, as I recall. But there are some things that are slightly different. And they're much closer to what transpires in our state legislature. You get so much time, you get so many questions, and you're done. And quite honestly, we have drifted from that quite a bit from when I was first on council. And I'm not sure I brought that document with me tonight, but I think I've still got it. And those are council rules, but they are a little bit more restrictive than what generally Robert's rules are. So if we could find that, that'd be great.
Great, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Move on to legislative review then, Mr. City Manager. Nothing on that? Okay, then before we go to council around the table, there was, I'll bring that up, but as far as, there was a question that's been asked now by a couple different establishments in town, and especially with the newest order that has come out, saying that bars and restaurants need to close down at 10 o'clock. So I'm hoping that maybe Mr. Henley could fill us in tonight on what the rules are as far as when it comes to delivery of, in particular, delivery of alcohol from, if somebody comes to get carry out, how does that process work? The question was asked as to whether or not they can actually deliver or have alcohol delivered from their establishment to another location. And then basically, if there's anything that can be done for businesses now that they're need to close down to inside capacity, is there anything that can be done for them to continue delivery service and alcohol service after hours? Clear as mud. So,
Is that all?
that's it. So, Mr. Henley.
Thank you very much. No, this is a really interesting question. I know we've talked about it in periphery and in tangentially and sometimes directly. And, I'd written a memo, I think, to all of you, and 6 months ago, and we'd asked the AG's office to help us out and sort it out, because we had a little bit of a dispute between certain jurisdictions as to whether they could or couldn't deliver. So let me kind of go through this. It'll take a bit of time, but I think it's pretty well ordered, and so I hope it makes sense. But if not, let me know. Raise your hand, stop me as we're going through, and we'll see if we can't get it sorted out and make sense for everybody here, as well as anybody who has questions, who's an operator or is thinking about operating some type of business that would involve the delivery of alcohol. And I'd like to start off by just talking a little bit about the order that was entered by the executive department of the state back in April, when this COVID situation first came out, and all of the bars and the liquor establishments were shut down. And so one of the orders, which was Order 2020-7, it basically addressed restaurants or those licenses that were bar and grill licenses, and pay particular attention to, and I think a lot of times people that we talk to, they don't pay attention to what type of license that they have or want to have, but that's really critical here in Wyoming. If you have a retail license, that's kind of the king of all licenses. They obviously are going to cost a lot more, but you have a lot more flexibility than you're going to have with some of the other types of licenses. So in any event, because bars and restaurants, bar and grills, and restaurants, made a lot of their money and probably a greater margin business off of the sale of the alcoholic beverages with the food that they would deliver, the governor came down and entered this executive order and said, look, we will permit you to sell off-premise malt beverage and wines, even though, you as a restaurant or a bar and grill, you don't get to do that. The only way you get to send any type of alcohol home with your customer is if they ordered the wine with their meal, they didn't quite finish their bottle of wine, you take it back, you seal it up, and you can send them home with that. But they had to have been opened, it had to have been drunk with their meal, and then at that point, you seal it back up, they put it away in their car, and you can send them on their way. He made a big change, the executive branch made a big change in doing this back in April, so that they could try to help the bars and grills and the restaurants. But they put some limitations on it that would be consistent with their licensing. The alcohol sale had to be on the same receipt or the same transaction as the accompanying food sale. The alcohol had to be in its original container. The alcohol had to be sold at its regular menu price. The businesses had to notify local law enforcement that they're temporarily selling off premises and providing them a price list. And I think we had only 2 places here in Casper that actually went to the police department and said we wanted to do this. And I think there were a couple that were pretty darn successful in doing it, but there were really only 2 that we know of that did it officially. And the sale must occur within the licensed building. Again, if you look at Wyoming law on liquor, it's always tied to some type of real property. When you see all of those applications you've seen, all of them, they are all tied to a location, and if that location, you don't own it, you better have some permission from your landlord that you can sell liquor there, because that's required, because that's the focal point of your license. So in any event, at that point, the executive order did provide that they could have either takeout and or curbside pickup directly at the licensed business location. And so that was the order that came out to try to expand the ability of at least two categories of liquor license owners, restaurants and bar and grill license, so that they could kind of keep their margins up and hopefully keep their people employed, keep the lights on, that type of thing. And of course, that, no, when they opened up again and let people go back and start to patronize and be seated in the restaurants and bars and grills and liquor establishments, then of course that order was pulled out, and in fact, it was repealed and hasn't been, is not currently in place to what we could locate. That kind of brings us then to, well, what's the current status? And I think this is probably what the mayor is talking about, at least to some degree. And so the December 7th order, just this week, the governor came out and he was talking about bars and restaurants and, you know, what are we going to do with them? So the order came out, one of the portions of this order, and this is the order, I'm not seeing the number off of it right offhand. It's a continuation, I think, of 18, but I'm not seeing that exactly. But it addressed basically restaurants, cafes, coffee houses, bars, taverns, microbreweries, public establishments offering food, beverages, alcoholic beverages for on-premises consumption may provide services indoors and outdoors under the following restrictions. And one of those then was, and this is just this week, all patrons that are at these establishments shall be seated at tables or booths. You have to have the social distancing. You have to do all of the infections. You have to have notices posted. But where it comes then is that you're only going to get to go till 10 o'clock at night. And so I think some of the owners are saying, well, we've been restricted again here because we can't be open from 10 till 2 or 10 till midnight or whatever we did. So is the government giving us the ability now to re-implement this order back from April? No, they have not. So the businesses shall close for operations for on-premises consumption from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. So what does that mean? Well, we have a much bigger group.
Is that last call, or?
It could be last call for some folks, and it depends again when we get back to what type of business it is. And here you have this really broad swath of businesses, from food businesses, your cafes, your high-end restaurants, your low-end restaurants, to a variety of liquor licenses. And so at 10 o'clock, what happens? Well, if you're if you are in fact a business, you can continue to provide takeout and delivery options if authorized by law after 10 p.m. And so, well, you can sell food. So yeah, they get to have takeout, or they can have curbside delivery. So a restaurant can do that. You know, you can go pick up a pizza, you can go pick up your chicken or whatever you want to get in that regard. If they want to stay open, they can do that. So that's pretty easy. So that takes care of a swath of business owners. Well, how about then just liquor license dealers? What can they do? They can, if you are a retail liquor license owner, you've always been able to have people have takeout. And with the city council's permission, you can actually have a drive-up area, as long as you comply with the ordinance, which of course has been part of the city of Casper code for, I think, at least decades. And so in that regard, that particular type of business can continue to operate after 10 o'clock. But as far as other businesses, the restaurants, the bar and grill that we previously saw, you know, after 10 o'clock, there's really no provision for them to operate consistent with the law that we have in the state to go out now and deliver that liquor away from their business premises. And so in that case, they've got to, basically at 10 o'clock, they're going to have to shut down, except for their own restaurant business. So they can continue to sell food, but not liquor. Continuing on, I think to get to some of the more generalized questions, and I would point you out to the Wyoming state statutes in this regard. Location and regulation restrictions as to the place of sale and inspections. So this is 12-5-201 as a statute. The principal place in which alcoholic and malt beverages are sold under a license shall be located in the licensed building for which the license is issued and approved by the licensing authority. Again, we're getting back to that real estate. That's the anchor of that license. So there's premise number one, principle number one. Alcoholic beverages may be served only in the licensed building and in an immediately adjacent fenced or enclosed area as approved by the local licensing authority. So we see during parade days, Frosty's puts up an adjacent little partition and has a loud band, and they can sell their liquor there. But also, like we talked about a little bit earlier, you can have a drive-up area with the council's permission. And so, but again, well, who can do that? Who can do that? So we get back to examining, well, what type of license would that be? And if you look at it, we have under our own ordinances, 5.08260, use of drive-in areas, restrictions. Well, who can do that? Retail liquor licenses. Upon approval of the City Council, a drive-in area adjacent or contiguous to a licensed room may be used by the holder of a retail liquor license for taking orders, making delivery of, and receiving payment for alcoholic liquors or malt beverages under the following conditions. And then there are a lot of conditions, but the ones that are, I think, important for your consideration and review would be the area shall be well lighted and subject to inspection by the City Council or its designee. No wall screen shall interfere with observing and checking the part of the area used for orders, delivery, and payment. No part of a publicly owned sidewalk, highway, street, or alley shall be used for taking orders and conducting sales. So those first two I read, they weren't very hard to comply with. But if you happen to not have your own property around your licensed area, say you're on a street like Frontier Microbrewery would be, they don't have their own area. They've got to be using public sidewalks, public streets. They are not going to be able to have this, and they wouldn't be qualified for it anyway because they're not a retail liquor license. But so that's something that's kind of important. But if you in fact have that, then you certainly can come to this council and explain, this is what I like to do. And, you know, we've got plenty of room for it, and your officers are going to be able to make sure that we're not selling it to minors or to parolees or to probationary people or to people out on bond and whose court orders say you can't buy a liquor license, you can't be around liquor. And so in that regard, they can continue to do that. So as far as this current order, if they want to come to the council and say, you know, we've got this this area and it's right next to where we're licensed to do business, and we can have the people drive up and we can have them come over, pick their liquor up from us outside, that would be appropriate, and that would be consistent not only with our own ordinance, but it would be consistent with Governor, I believe, with Governor Gordon and the executive branch's order that was just issued yesterday. The one thing, the drive-up windows are just, that is not something that we permit unless you're grandfathered in. And I know sometimes people like to think that they can do that, and but again, our council long ago said we're just not going to let them do that in the future unless they're being grandfathered in. So the other questions about this would be by way of background is, and I think the more expansive question of you, Mayor, is, well, can we deliver liquor away from the property that the owners have, whether it's retail, whether it's bar and grill, restaurant, manufacturing, microbrewery. You know, and again, the licensing principle is it's attached to the real property, and the definition of sale in Wyoming, again, is pretty tight. I mean, if you do this or you do that, you've committed a sale of liquor. And remember, if you're going to commit a sale of liquor, you have to do it on your property or in your property. So sale or sell includes the offering for sale, trafficking in, bartering, delivering, or dispensing, and pouring for value, exchanging for goods. Any way other than purely gratuitous, every delivery of alcoholic liquor or malt beverage made otherwise than by gift constitutes a sale. And so therein, I think, lies the state statute declaration that basically, again, the sale, the delivery has to be there at the licensed area. And that would be Wyoming Statute 12-1-101A, Roman numeral 36, all in little letters, little characters. The delivery of liquor, obviously, if you take it out to someone, would be an express example, almost certainly to obtain patronage, a greater margin, additional purchases, and it would all be done off the licensed premises, the way I understand a lot of these places would like to operate. So that would be, under the current statutes, illegal, and it would not be really consistent with the logic of the Wyoming liquor license laws. Logically, too, the legislature knows how to permit off-premises sales if it chooses to do so, again, looking at the various licenses that we have. You know, we have malt beverage permits, so people can go off sales, off-site with those. Catering permits, and liquor dealers can go off premises with those. This past legislative term, the manufacturers were permitted to have a promotional ability to go off-site and to have limited interactions with different groups and let them taste and purchase their goods. But again, all of those are limited in number. They're obtained by application, and they're tied to a location, and they're confined to the locality of the license. Other than the above exceptions, retail, bar and grill, restaurant licenses are restricted to their places of business. And again, even as noted in the executive's first order back in April, restaurants and bar and grills can't send alcohol out their door to be consumed off premises with that one exception. That open wine bottle didn't get quite finished, didn't get maybe a lot finished. But it had to be opened, it had to be drunk with the food, and they have to be on the same ticket. So in that regard, I think that's pretty consistent again with the thought process that you cannot be delivering away from your actual licensed premises. In talking about the drive-up areas, that is something I think that a lot of places could use, and even under the current restrictions, where people are more limited, you know, you can't just come and drive up, but you know, just have those people come into your building with 2 feet if they're insisting upon driving up. And I'm not talking here about the COVID restrictions. I'm just talking here about people that want the convenience of it. But say that, you know, there was the Frontier or Backwards, you know, if they're just selling this and it's just a matter that they want to provide that convenience for someone, unfortunately, they don't have a great area to do this drive-up place. But if they want to put a place out there, you know, a table, come in, put your credit card down, let us know what you want. You can go step outside and we'll bring it over to you. If they don't want them in your building because they're concerned about social distancing or whatever, they can do that. And we don't even have to worry about the language of the lighting and not being screened, and certainly not on the public space, because this would be, 2 feet within the boundaries of their own business. So I think if you look at this, there's a lot of workarounds to it, but there are going to be some, if you're looking to try to sell it across town, you're just not going to be able to do that under our current statutes. I believe with that, we've pretty much covered the licensing. And there are a lot more areas, if you have a hotel license, well, you can serve it, again, with certain restrictions to rooms within your hotel a little bit away from where your bar is, but that's a special license. But again, the legislature said, if you're going to sell it away from where that license is at, or where you're mixing the drinks, we're going to make sure that we have a special exception, which is stated explicitly for you. And we just don't have that with respect, except to these limited circumstances. So, Mayor, I'm hoping that answered your question. I hope that it was logical enough that you could follow, and that I didn't misstate myself or talk too fast or too softly.
Well, it drummed up 2 more questions, but I'm going to let Councilman Hopkins go first.
Well, I'm not sure I gained anything here, because we still don't know if you take a bottle and you get a corking charge and you drink that bottle at 10:04 and you brought the bottle in at 7 o'clock, is that legal or not legal? And the other thing, what if you sign your receipt at 10:04? Did you break the law because you had liquor that was signed for at 10:04? I read through all of these rules today, and quite honestly, they're complicated. There's a lot of boilerplate, but how you make this work is just not there. And I think we're going to need some clarification on it. We can say, okay, you got to close the doors at 10 o'clock. So that means you got to have last call at 9:30, and that's just not clear. And it's not coming out yet. So I think something needs to be done at the state level if we're going to do this. We can pull this off, but when you read through those rules, there are 5 documents in the last one I saw today, and most of it is boilerplate, but it doesn't give you the how-to. When is the 10 o'clock cutoff time? Does your ticket have to be signed and you have to be out the door at 10 o'clock? It's not clear.
I don't know if you had something to add back to that, but then I do have another question.
Just the language.
I'm not asking for an answer tonight.
Okay, fair enough, yeah. The language just says the business shall close operations for on-premises consumption from 10 p.m. and after. So I suspect, you could have bought it then, but if you're going to consume it, you're probably going to have to put the drink down at 10 o'clock, and you can't have it anymore, because it does say the word consumption. So that's, again, haven't given it any thought. It wasn't a hypothetical that even came to my mind, but that would be kind of.
10 o'clock is 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
So I guess what brought this all about was the question of, the question of, in the beginning when things were shutting down within our community, we allowed restaurants downtown to move outside onto the public sidewalk, have tables out there, be served out there. And so I think this question is along the same lines of, if we're allowing restaurants to do that, why would we not be able to allow drinking establishments to do the same thing? And I guess it's more, not so much putting chairs and tables out there so people can sit outside and consume, but if they cannot be inside of a restaurant after a certain amount of time to buy alcohol, can they be outside? And can we look at, is there anything that we can do, just like we did with restaurants, to move them out onto the sidewalk so that they can still continue to do business? And I guess what I'm saying is an extension of a serving area itself to an outdoor portion of the business that would basically just extend it to where they could still do business outside their doors, but within a confined area, and not with a chain link fence doesn't make sense to put a fence up around it and block it off that way. But I guess that's the question is, if we could do it for restaurants, and I know we're talking about alcohol, but at the end of the day, we're talking about business. We're, you know, I can bring a burger out to you and serve it to you and make money, so why can't I bring a beer out to you and make money? That's the question that's being asked, and is there a workaround that we can make that happen in a safe, responsible way that does not create any more work for the police department, but at the same time, it keeps businesses afloat to where they can continue to make money?
And you're talking about after 10 PM?
Yeah. Well, actually, I guess the entire time, not just after 10 PM. I think, yeah, I mean, if you do it, you just wouldn't do it at 10 o'clock at night. I think that if you did it, you would just allow it from the time the business was open till after 10 until they closed.
Yeah, and we've talked about, and in fact, I think it was this council a couple of years ago, we talked about letting people just kind of park on our sidewalks, and I think it was pretty unanimous that that was, when we went through the law on that, that was not appropriate. I know here is an effort to somehow help these people along for a limited period of time. I think that, you know, obviously some people took more advantage than others. Some people said, you know, we will have call up or takeout, and so you would call up and then they would take it out. But other places then put up one table with a couple of chairs, then all of a sudden it was two tables with a couple of more chairs, and then basically you're crowding the sidewalk for disabled or mothers walking their children, or, you know, people walking their dogs and the like. And it's one of those things that you really don't want to be involved in. But you know, there are ways that you might be able to think about it, but probably want to do it per process. You know, if you're going to do that, let's visit about it and try to figure out what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, but also think about what you're giving up and burdens you're placing upon other people that might be used to going downtown, but now they really can't walk their usual route because people have put up, you know, all kinds of everything from sandwich board signs to chairs to planters to whatever else. And so it's a code enforcement problem, which fortunately for me, I don't look at a whole lot.
And I appreciate that, and I respectfully just say that what we talked about, or whatever the council at the time talked about, as far as sidewalks 2 years ago, this year is not 2 years ago. This is COVID. We're in the middle of this pandemic that is affecting businesses. So I'm looking at it as it's a different time in our lives right now, and our businesses are feeling the effects of it. And so as much as I have for it's almost 3 decades sat there and said, well, this is the law and this is the way the law is, these are different times at the moment. And the way I look at it, businesses are hurting, and I'm not asking, you know, I guess I'm conveying what's being said to me. I don't think anybody's asking that we permanently move serving areas outside and we permanently have alcohol outside. We're saying for the time being, as long as there's restrictions in place, is there a workaround that we are not shutting business completely down to where they can still make a dollar and survive?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Huber.
I think there's some merit to a lot of the things that you're saying, but at this point, there's an even bigger reality than the coronavirus or anything else, and that's that it's getting cold outside. And I don't think, and unless these people are saying they're going to put up space heaters, tents, and all that kind of stuff out there on the sidewalk, parking lots, or wherever, which is a different issue, I think we're engaging in a fairly academic discussion here. I'm not going to want to go sit outside and be cold, you know, and I've done some really weird things in my life. But, you know, I really, and it's a different time of the year than it was last spring. You know, it was warming up and we had a fairly nice spring. Even as nice and warm as it's been here lately, that's rapidly coming to an end. And so I just really think we're having an academic discussion, unless someone is coming in with a proposal that they want to put up a tent, space heaters, et cetera, out in their parking lot or on the sidewalk or something like that. And then I think that's a different issue.
The only thing I'll add to that is I'm not saying we're putting up tents, space heaters, or anything like that. If you extend a serving area itself, and it includes, I'll just use an example, Frontier. if you're downtown and Frontier wants to expand, if they wanted to expand their serving area out to the curb, somebody could pull up in their vehicle and they can literally pay for it and walk the stuff right out to them right there. That's what I'm asking, is if that's a possibility, not somebody standing out in the heater or with the heater out there trying to stay warm, just simply expanding their business onto the sidewalk so that they can still continue to do business. Councilman Powell.
I appreciate the intent as well, Mr. Mayor, but if I'm remembering correctly, wasn't the whole problem with the sidewalk, wasn't the whole problem with the sidewalk cafes, the whole business of a private entity essentially getting revenue using a public space?
That was certainly part of it. Yes, sir.
Okay. So that's a real headache for us, isn't it?
Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, maybe I'm not hearing it correctly, but are you talking about expanding the serving area as a means of conveyance, not necessarily setting up an additional table space and floor space?
Right, because they're not
Is that
gonna
what
be,
you're saying?
they're not actually gonna be coming back into the business. So if somebody pulled up in front of a business and they basically ordered whatever they wanted to order, they could sit out in their vehicle, if it's not cold, they could stand in the area out in front of the business, and that could be a serving area to where it's
Receive
brought
the
out to them.
product and leave.
Yes. And I totally understand that the sidewalk is not, I know the arguments we went through. All I'm saying is, let's look where we're at today. I guess I'm asking for, just a relaxation of it. I mean, you have businesses that are not doing very well right now, and if we just sit here and go by the letter of the law and say, this is the way it is, by golly, then people are gonna fail, businesses are gonna fail, and
You're asking for temporary relief for businesses.
that's exactly what I'm asking for.
And once the vaccine comes out or we're back to quote normal, then.
Back to normal.
Okay, people, clean up your chairs, clean up your billboards on the sidewalks. We're back to 2019.
That's exactly where I'm going with that,
Okay.
so.
So, Mr. Mayor, am I hearing a request for some information be brought back to the council, or what would be your desire in this regard?
Well, I personally would, I guess we'll see how everybody feels about it, but I personally think that, we should be, if we've had a request from citizens to come here to look for a way to help them, then I'm looking for a way to help them. If nobody wants the information to come forward and it dies right here, it does. But all I'm saying is, if we have an opportunity to basically put on hold right now some of these rules that are gonna affect, traffic on the sidewalk for maybe the next 2 months or 3 months, then I'd like to have that discussion. If it will help out businesses and help keep the economy afloat around here, because the last thing, we've sat here and said it many times, the last thing we wanted to do is take a step back. We're taking a step back. So at this point in time, I'd like to take another step back forward and see what we can do to help businesses out that are now gonna lose revenue from the times that they're shut down. So, I guess that's what I'm asking for. So I'll ask council, is everybody good with more information coming forward on this, or just let it go?
Some concepts.
Some concepts,
Okay.
okay. Vice Mayor Lutz.
The only thing I worry about is what that looks like. And the reason I say that is we have one meeting left this year, and then we have a full 2 weeks off, and then we're back in January. And then let's pretend that whatever we're going to do requires 3 readings. Like, the vaccine's going to beat us at this point by the time we actually get to something that's like helpful to these businesses. And so I think the problem is this window is very tight as far as actually providing them relief, especially when you're talking about places that, the holidays have a tendency to be a larger percentage of their sales when you're looking at a full 365 picture. And so I wonder, I guess my concern is what the time crunch is on options that we would actually have.
All we can do.
You see,
Mr. Henley.
thank you, Mayor. Again, it depends what you're looking to do. If it's just a matter of having people come in and say, I want to have a drive-up area, pursuant to that, that would be something that doesn't require an ordinance, no 3 readings for that. But again, we do have the ordinance that says, if you're going to do that, it's got to be open, it's got to be well lit, it's got to be on your own property. So if you want to change those things by law, that's one thing. If you want to just say have an administrative, kind of blind eye to it, that's, then that's another thing. And, you don't want to enact an ordinance to say that we're not going to enforce our ordinance, we're just going to turn a blind eye to it. But I think that's kind of where you're looking, or as I understand the council's direction, that must be kind of where we're looking to go. And so I'm just not sure, what the thought process, if there's a specific idea that somebody has, they can always bring it to you, they can always bring it to Carla and to Fleur, and they will contact, the city manager and me, and we can look at it and try to work on it. And I know that someone, actually, I think that the mayor, you are aware that we were able to come up, I thought, with a very good workaround for one of the businesses here in town that wanted to have something happen, but they couldn't do it pursuant to the current code. And so, we worked hard to try to make that happen. And I think that we always do. But to say, Mr. City Attorney, will you break the law? I'm not right there. So again, if you've got some ideas, we're happy to try to work with you and try to think of workarounds. But otherwise it would be kind of an administrative thing to talk with the police chief about, really what gets enforced and what doesn't get enforced. And are you going to be enforcing this over the Christmas holidays? And I don't know that that's, I don't know how you even go about doing that, but.
Okay. By no means am I asking anybody to break the law. I am asking simply for if it's a matter of extending a service area to allow a business to do business longer, then that's what I'm asking for. If that's considered breaking the law, let me know that we're breaking the law, and I'll tell you I don't want to break the law. Councilman Huber.
Well, and Mr. Mayor, I think it's probably a good idea to look into these kind of things. Everybody's all excited about vaccinations and that kind of thing. I was at a local pharmacy yesterday getting the booster shot for my shingles vaccine. I asked the pharmacist there, well, okay, you guys getting ready for all this? And he said, oh, probably next summer. And so, at least that pharmacy is figuring it's a long ways out for the vaccine. And so, everybody needs to keep that in mind. So to the extent that we want to try to help these outfits, yeah, it's a few months out, at least 6 or so months that they're going to be impacted.
Councilman Bates.
I know this is a long shot of asking and probably just ignored, but you're talking about short term, and I agree with what you're saying. We need to help them any way we can, and if that is altering a little bit, great. But also, I think we need to be looking at the longer term, and I'm just wondering if this body would be willing to put a letter to the governor and to the legislation on some of these issues, especially the delivery of alcohol. I think it should be allowed. I think that should. And I think if one body starts a chain reaction, maybe others will, and we can get pushed through sooner than later, then COVID goes away and it's not looked at anymore. I think it should be looked at, period. And I think now would be the perfect time to let the governor and let our legislators know that they should push this through to help those businesses out. I just would like to see something quicker moved like that, but with the body. But that's just thought.
I guess to add to that, Councilman Bates, there is something in the state legislature right now, I believe, with delivery of alcohol going through at this time. So, anybody else? Okay, we'll do council around the table then. Councilman Bates.
Nothing.
Councilman Huber.
Nothing, thank you.
Councilman Pacheco.
Nothing tonight.
Councilman Johnson.
I don't have anything tonight.
Okay. Councilman Cathy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this pertains to upcoming board appointments. But I know that we are losing 2 people from the water board. And I don't know whether, because I replaced Councilman Walsh, whether my appointment runs out at the end of this year or not. But basically, we have next council meeting, and then the council meeting on the 5th are the only 2 council meetings that we have to formally vote to appoint people to those definitely 2 and potentially 3 positions on the water board before they meet on the 19th of January. So that's something that at least that particular board, we need to make appointments to, or we need to get people in place to be able to make that meeting on the 19th.
So I've already gotten several lists from new council members and existing council members. We also have tomorrow during council orientation, we'll be going over boards at that point in time. So it's in the works.
Very good. And I would like to stay on the water board if possible.
Okay. All right, is that it? Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This afternoon, just before I came to the meeting, I was printing off some stuff off of Oil City News, and I got a printer that works, so I sent you guys copies of it. It's on your desk. And this was as of 3:40 this afternoon. If you look on the second page, the Wyoming Department of Health has published the death rates for heart disease, cancer, chronic lower respiratory disease, and accidents. And right now, if you were to put the COVID deaths in there, they would rate right after accidents. And the real meat of this thing is that this is the first time I had seen today any information regarding death rate by age. And I will admit to being one of the older guys, but right now, if you're between 60 and 69%, Wyoming Department of Health is saying that you have a 12.1% chance of dying from COVID-19 if you get it. If you're between 70 and 79, you have a 32.9% chance of dying if you get it. And if you're 80 plus, you have a 45% chance of dying if you get it. So what I'm telling you is that everybody's been saying that old people are going to die sooner, and they will die sooner, but this is the first time I've seen any data based on age. The death rate for somebody that's, 5 or 10 years old is almost zero. But it's a serious disease for old people, so all I ask is that you mask up and take it seriously. And I know there's a lot of people out there that don't believe in masks, but I don't want them around me. Thank you.
Councilman Powell.
Well, I can't resist a piggyback on that because, Mr. Mayor, you 2 months ago were in a press conference drew an analogy between DUI and people going out in the community in indoor spaces without masks on. And I do think there are a lot of parallels there. And so I realize that we have made public statements that we won't be enforcing a mask mandate, but there's a real disconnect there, in my opinion, when people put their other people's lives at risk by getting under the by driving under the influence, and most of the time, the vast majority of the time, creating no problems whatsoever, but every once in a while creating a very serious problem. And the same holds true with people going out in the community without wearing a mask and defying that order and placing other people's lives at risk in the same way that someone is putting lives at risk when they drive under the influence. And so I believe that that mask mandate should be enforced. That's all. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
Nothing tonight.
Okay. Only 2 things that I'm going to add is, 2 weeks ago, I can tell you I've been staying in constant contact with a doctor up at Wyoming Medical Center. 2 weeks ago, we were pushing 70 patients up there that were COVID positive. I can tell you we're down in the low 40s right now, so something is going right. And I'm glad to see that, and I'm not going to attribute it to anything. All I'm going to say is let's keep going the direction that we're going and having these numbers drop. The other thing is, this week, I've personally known two people that it's that time of the year, and I guarantee you the chief would agree with me that we get into this time of the year, this season, people get depressed. We see suicide rates go through the roof. This year, in particular, you have everything that's gone on with everything in the world. I'm not even going to rehash it, but this week alone, I've known two people that have attempted suicide. One was very successful in doing it within our own industry, and I got to tell you, a terrible loss, because probably one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. You would have never even thought in the world there was anything wrong. So, just saying, watch your friends, watch closely to people. It's tough times. You get into this time of the year, people get depressed, and those type of things happen. So, just pay close attention, because you may see a sign and be able to help somebody out, but if you don't look for the sign, you can't help them out. You can't bring them back after they make that decision. So, anyways, that's all I have for tonight. So, thank you.